to us. Computationally, then finally, many of these models are computational. They have to be done on computer, but not all. So there are examples where you can simplify some of them. We'll talk about this distinction. So they're not entirely, computational does not necessarily, an agent-based model does not necessarily have to be a computational model. Neither does, most DSGE, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models, often many of them are computational themselves, even though they're not agent-based models. So whether it's computational or not is probably not the distinguishing feature. The ones I work on generally have to be. They're of a level of complexity and richness that they have to be computational. So where do you see these things? Where are the applications? And maybe, I know this is a very diverse group, so hopefully you will see one of your realms up there. Obviously, there are lots of uses going on in economics, finance. There are people using them, and may not think about this, but in marketing. Marketing has been using them a lot to interpret social media data in new ways with agent-based modeling. They, of course, have a lot of data that they're trying to analyze. So these have been, finance and economics may have been going longer than marketing, but all of these things have been going. If you want to push farther afield than these sort of areas, you might end up with sociology, political science, and even biology. All agent-based models have been making some inroads into all these different fields. So political science may have voting models, opinions, and different types of models in political science. Sociology has ones where people are kind of bumping into each other and sharing opinions, and those sorts of things go on. And we're getting and there are biology models with little critters chasing each other, eating each other. They're out there. There are actually books in biology on agent-based modeling. And then if you go even farther afield for applications, yes, there are applications in public policy. I have seen some agent-based models. I'm not sure if I trust them on things like healthcare policy, definitely business approaches they're working on. And there actually are agent-based modelers in doing military simulations with little like tanks and planes and things flying around. I don't do any of this stuff, but I have seen these things. So they are sort of making a lot of, they are very much all over the place in the world of modeling. But we're, of course, just going to today just stay with not just economics, but really with finance. I first stop in thinking about philosophy of these there is an interesting question of philosophy. Do you want to build like the giant end-all agent-based model for the world? Or do you want to build kind of a relatively stripped-down, simple sort of model? And in the world of people who have thought about this, or kind of originators of this, there is kind of an idea of pushing for a simple model philosophy. That's sort of the way I often think, is trying to build fairly simple models to get at what we want to, just as we might in standard economic modeling build relatively simple models. And these are a couple proponents of this, I would say. Schelling may be the most famous of these, and he wasn't even really, that's micromotives and macro behavior. The citations, again, the full citations are in your notes on these. That's sort of, he's maybe one of the originators of this. He doesn't think of himself as an agent-based modeler, but that book really has the philosophy of thinking of individual behavior and how it aggregates up, and aren't there some interesting things that happen in between there. I think a modern take on this, obviously Axelrod contributed to this. Epstein and Axtell have a very important book from the late 1990s on what's known as the Sugarscape model, which is this kind of highly stylized economy with agents wandering around in it. But if you're getting into this field, the book that I think is most important for stressing building simple thought experiments, but most of them still computational, is Miller and Page, who really push this hard as sort of, this is the how to build kind of simple stylized models out there for economics. I said I was going to give you sort of the master resources. If you're getting started, if you come away with this feeling like, yeah, I'm really interested, and you also say, well, I'm not really interested in this finance stuff, but I might do this in some other realm of economics. This is a good reference to start with. This is an old handbook of computational economics, not that old, but this one is completely dedicated to agent-based modeling. And it's a good sort of, don't mean to make you run out and buy this giant book, but this has not just finance, it has about 15 chapters on lots of different experimental economics. It's all dedicated to economics, but differing wings of economics in the world of agent-based modeling. Now, Lee Tesfatsion, who is one of the editors here, along with Ken Judd, Lita Svatsion, another big resource is she runs a huge website. The ACE, she refers to this as agent-based. ACE stands for Agent-Based Computational Economics. And if you need info really beyond, if you're interested and you want to not buy the book, matter of fact, before you buy the book, you might want to go to the website and just poke around. She is one of these amazing resources. She puts in a huge amount of effort into covering all sorts of things on agent-based modeling out there. And that's another great resource. So why do we care in economics? What features, I think, sort of agent-based models are we going to see? You know, why is it useful to do this in economics? Some of the things, keep this in the back of your head. These are things to sort of store in the back of your head because we're going to see this. Things that happen that we're going to be interested in are endogenous coordination. These are models where, you know, somehow people's behavior gets lined up with each other in some sort of endogenous fashion. There are things internal in these systems that get people kind of lined up. And that's somewhat related to the second point here, that you can have systems that are driven by small independent shocks that are independent across the individuals, and still end up with relatively large macro shocks. So think about financial crashes in the stock market, think about business cycles, think about, you know, all sorts of instability that you want to think about. How do sort of large systems how do we end up seeing big moves in large systems? More traditional modeling, to get a big move in a big system, you've got to hit it with a big shock. These are often models where you don't need, the big shock is not necessary. Because of this kind of endogenous coordination that's going on, you still can be hitting with very small pieces of noise and end up with rather large dynamics. And I think this real point is what's been very appealing to people in terms of a modeling thing, because it feels sort of sensible. You don't need sort of giant mysterious shocks for these systems to bounce around. Now, we're about to enter the realm of finance, and we're going to look at very simple finance models. So this is me apologizing why there's not, like, if you're looking for sort of fancy macro connections in the finance models, you're not going to see them. So I apologize. I'm sorry. There's not going to be big macro sections in them, but there's a reason for that. The reason is really that I want to understand first start somewhere and understand simple price dynamics in a financial market first. It gives us much simpler agent behavior. You will see in the markets that I think about, if we started to add other macro components, they would get very complicated very fast. And finally, I'll try to add connections to macro. I'll talk about them. And I think they're doable here, but it's best to sort of start on the finance side. And I'll end with sort of one other thing that I think about here is what we'll often be after is a really basic thing, which is I'm going to think about a lot of models where I'm trying to figure out why the market or why expectations of future prices seem to be, you know, people expect prices to rise and maybe keep rising. And I say this when people ask, well, do you have like the ultimate model of the housing crisis? I don't have mortgages. I don't have fancy mortgage-backed securities. I don't have weird rating systems. I don't have any of that stuff in these models. On the other hand, I'm not so sure that they are at the core, the guts of what was really the problem. Problem often comes back to this, that somewhere out there are expectations of some asset price continuing to rise over time. Why do those expectations arise? Why do they survive? Why are people using them? And it sort of gets to something much more fundamental than whether it was a CDO squared that blew up on the 4th of March or something. That's why I still hold to this kind of simple, the models you will see will be relatively stylized here. Okay. Yeah.
Isn't that the core that people have to expect price, otherwise I wouldn't buy the house. If I would expect the price of the house to go down.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So I think this is at the core of philosophical maybe, but the price expectation have to be expected to go up, otherwise I wouldn't buy.
I totally agree with you. And you get to, and also when you get to the bottom of what people were putting into various models to think about the probabilities of foreclosures and things like that, they were putting in expectations of those prices going up. So across the board, philosophically, this is in there. So I think it's a fundamental thing that, so it's, the details are somewhat, and the details are somewhat irrelevant in the recent crisis. The fact that we've seen, this is part of everyone. Yeah, I mean, I'm just agreeing with you many times over. What did financial markets look like, these agent-based financial? This is a quick, very quick over. So now we move to finance. Everything I've said before could be applied to any macro or other economic situation, or could be biology for that matter. I haven't said anything that's particularly true for finance. Well, there are, I think, a couple big goals here that have gone on. And this is true of the whole field of agent-based finance. People have actually started, and we'll see a lot of this today, with the idea of replicating a lot of features out there, financial features. There are a lot of features of financial time series which are not that easy for traditional models to replicate. There are certain things we'll see in like 2 slides. I'll start describing what some of those are. And many agent-based models have started with this as sort of primary job number 1, to sort of figure out models. And I will argue they do a pretty good job of this. But the second part, which I think is equally important to doing this, is to understand how adaptive behavior and learning and sort of overall market ecology, sort of what it looks like. And what does a financial market look like when you basically have all these competing different hypotheses about what's going on out there, with people learning and thinking and trying to beat others and trying to effectively making money and trying to compete with each other. We don't have, there never really was, until agent-based models came along, we didn't have kind of a good picture of that. The general standard models were based on, obviously, kind of an equilibrium concept where much of this kind of adaptation and learning had already gone by and everyone's already figured everything out. And so agent-based models are very much trying both of these things. We don't just want to replicate time series, but we also want to really get inside and understand at least get in these theoretical models, what does this world look like? And then maybe we can kind of better interpret what's going on in the real data, because we don't have that many models that really attack number 2. Obviously, we hope for a more realistic modeling platform. So this is a platform where people are doing, when we look around in markets, you know, usually we don't just see everybody sitting there saying, okay, we know we're in an equilibrium, that's it. We see people learning and adjusting and adapting and doing these things. So we do want to see what this kind of realistic modeling platform is going to look like. So it's important. You'll see a lot of, when you see these models, I think, in the world, that sometimes it looks like one is the only objective out there. And I think it's important that we have other objectives going on. More surveys. So if you're interested in reading about, sort of, if you really are interested in the finance side, here are some very excellent surveys to look at. This is the one I handed out because I figured I could hand out mine. And that came out of that handbook. But actually, my note is a little dated. 2006 was a long time ago. And these newer ones are really quite nice. I note that they all came out of the same book, so you only have to buy this one book. And there are differing approaches and differing thoughts. But if you had access to all 3 of these, that would really give you a very good summary of sort of the modern stage of financial modeling for agent-based models. I think those are, Kars Hummus, I just was talking to him, like, you can also ask him questions. I was just talking to him about 5 minutes ago. He's here, so not here physically in here, but he's here at this meeting. He's around. But these are all people who do a lot of agent-based modeling in finance. So in these financial models, what are we going to see? This sort of overlaps with what I've talked about before, so I'll mention these kind of quickly. We're going to see interacting agents and strategies playing against each other. We're going to see endogenous, usually they almost always have endogenous price time series. I like to remind people of that because they sometimes go, well, where did those prices come from? Well, in these models, they're usually endogenous. They're part of the system. And again, I'll have this endogenous heterogeneity, the kind of fraction of where people sit in terms of their beliefs, usually completely endogenous. And learning is going to be completely self-contained in these, that you have learning that leads to prices, leads to more learning about, then that affects new prices come online, that hits more learning. Not exactly, and you keep seeing this go by. My picture of that is essentially like this, that you really have, and I like this picture. To me, this sort of says it all. I probably show you this picture too many times, but really what you have is that you have these time series features, which feeds back into the population of different strategies, and which ones succeed, which ones don't succeed. But then those populations drive more time series features. Again, the time series are built off of what's going on in the population, and this loop just goes endlessly in these systems. Okay, I said I'd mention these empirical things that go on in financial markets. So here's the 1-minute guide to, because I don't know if everyone's out of finance here. So the 1-minute guide, which we'll see sort of more details as we move through these lectures. What are these features that people say are somewhat troubling? And many of them are also related to instability in financial markets. And I'll just describe them right now. I think of their features of both the short horizons and longer horizons, although I think it's important to try to link these. But for the moment, I'll divide them up into short and longer horizon sorts of features. If you look at, say, stock returns, foreign exchange returns, certain elements of interest rates, commodity prices, almost any asset price, you will see some elements of these sort of stylized features. That's why these are sort of very stylized kinds of facts. On the very short term, say daily, even minute by minute, fairly short, the returns or percentage changes in these prices are usually uncorrelated. This means there's really no easy predictability in them. It's very hard to predict whether the stock market's going to go up or down tomorrow. I'm not going to show you, if you're hoping to find that out from these lectures, no, there's no sort of miracle prediction of whether the market's going to go up or down, any of these kinds of markets. The random walk, to those of you who know about this, really, that's not a bad, rough approximation to this part of the time series. And it means that, and that also was and is still part of the lore defining what in finance is really the efficient markets idea, that really there is no predictability remaining. There's no hope in trying to beat the market out there. It looks pretty much random as it is. And that feature is what really drives that. We'll come back to how well that really holds. Well, actually, at short horizons, it definitely is really not a bad approximation. There's really no obvious, at least linear predictability at very short horizons. The second really big feature that's present in almost any financial series is you'll see more pictures of it, the persistence of volatility. Financial markets go through periods of high and low volatility. There are periods, usually, I don't have a blackboard, but I do it with my hand. There are periods in which these unpredictable, I do this a lot, they're moving around a lot. And then there are periods when markets tend to calm down. And then there are periods when they kind of start moving around a lot. And this is a really big feature of almost any financial time series. And they've led to entire modeling frameworks. So those of you who are familiar with what are known as Garch and Arch models, or Garch and Arch models, which are an econometric technology for dealing with changing volatility. That's part of this. And that's a huge feature to financial data. Another one, that one's maybe not be as well known as the third feature, which is that these return series tend to be what's known as leptokurtic, which means they're fat-tailed, which means these distributions are not normal generally at relatively high frequencies, daily data, weekly data. The distributions have more events out in the tail than a normal distribution. There are people who would say that that was actually a core to the financial crisis problems, that much risk modeling was based on normal distributions, and that really returns had these events. When you hear about someone saying, well, there was an event that was 5 standard deviations from the mean, which, the probability of seeing that in a normal distribution is as effectively 0. And just really flip people out. And it's true that almost any financial series you look at, return series, it's going to have fat tails out there. And we don't really have good models for generating that feature. So, yeah.
How would you combine that to what you said before? If the random is a good approximation, but still with fat tails, I mean, then it's not really random, or?
No, this doesn't actually, none of these are inconsistent with each other. So these large events, they happen, but they're not very predictable. There's nothing that can predict them, really. No one has a great model. I wouldn't say anyone has really a great model for predicting when these tail events are going to occur. So base case, think of it, it's a distribution of these changes, and effectively the random walk, but driven by sort of very extreme fat-tailed distributions. They're still unpredictable, so you could still think it's still consistent with that one. And actually, there's some interesting connections between these two Actually, the precedence of just persistent volatility looks a little bit fat-tailed itself. So there's some curious connections. So these guys there's no inconsistency between them. It may get a little more difficult. We look at longer horizons. There's another set of things going on. And no, I didn't repeat this accidentally. Actually, volatility persistence is a very long horizon sort of feature. Matter of fact, these things go out for almost a year, maybe 2 years in terms of volatility persistence. So periods of large volatility, as a matter of fact, the early 1930s, for about 4 years, the US stock market is extraordinarily volatile. So volatility persistence, sometimes I think of as both a short-term and a long-term sort of feature. Another thing is there is evidence for some return predictability out at the long horizon. Then in financial models or in other models, people think of this as fundamental mean reversion. The market has to come back. Usually almost all of these asset markets have some sort of fundamental driving them. In stocks, it's roughly dividends or earnings, whichever you like to think about. Foreign exchange, relative price levels, PPP and relative price levels. Other markets, futures markets, may have a spot price or the demand for oil or something that's coming back to. So there's usually some fundamental, and the markets, almost all of them, do eventually revert to those fundamentals in the kind of long horizon. How much predictability that drives, interesting. That usually you look for it. There is some out there. A bunch of people argue about that, but there's some. But also at the longer horizon, many of these markets have elements of what's called momentum, which means this goes back to PT plus 1 greater than PT. Strategies that are based on sort of following trends in a large range of asset prices turn out to work extraordinarily well, extraordinarily better than standard theory would have predicted. And there have been surveys, people have been looking this we've gone back to looking at data from the 19th century and even earlier, still see, and all over a lot of different markets, and we see some evidence for some predictability of sort of, if you look at like the last 6 months of returns, there is some persistence over kind of a near horizon on that. There's also some very interesting relationships on risk and return going on, and there are connections or lack of connections at the longer horizon between consumption and returns that people worry about. Some of those don't quite line up with some of the models out there. We'll get to those as we get into the next section. Okay, if you're going to, so that was like 2 seconds of, we're going to look at all of these things. I'm not giving up on these. That's just the kinds of features that we're going to be looking for out there in the data. Now, design questions. If you're going to build one of these things, you are now initially sitting there, you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you, and you're going to start building one of these. What do? You're sitting there, it's late at night, because you're still blank, your paper is still blank. You've got to actually, you're going to have to make a couple choices. And I'll just quickly, in my survey, actually go through this in more detail. We'll do this very quickly here. I'll just quickly touch on the design questions that you're going to have to think about. And you'll see how some of the models we look at attack them. First, you have to figure out price determination sort of issues. How do prices actually get formed? Yes, you've got all these expectations. You've got all these kind of agents out there with heterogeneous expectations. How do you combine them into some sort of price? Now, there are various mechanisms that people look at when they do this. Some will actually, you can actually set up either if your model is simple enough or if you want to use the computer, they will use actually a kind of a Walrasian auctioneer that we actually find the price either numerically or analytically that actually clears the market. You've got these beliefs. Those convert simply into a demand curve, and then you sort of just simply clear the market for that. You kind of then stylize across whatever's going on in the market dynamics. I use this a lot. A lot of the models we'll look at today use that. But there are other techniques out there. Some people will actually model the exact institution of trading, which can be done relatively realistically these days because a lot of instruments trade electronically. So you can have what's known as an electronic order book where orders come into this electronic trading hub, and then you just replicate the algorithms that run in the real electronic trading hub. That's very realistic. It's a little more difficult to do that, but it is quite realistic to what's going on in the real world. Other people think of kind of a specialist system where they have sort of somebody out there. There's an element of kind of market of demand. There's demand and supply at a given time, and the price, that's always out of balance, and the price is sort of, the specialist takes on the excess demand or excess supply and then readjusts the price accordingly. That's another technique that's used. And you will see basically all three of those going on out there. after you've got the price figured out, and I'm not sure, there's a lot of, once you got the price figured out, you've got to figure out how people are learning. And that's the big question in these models. What kind of model do you think about for learning and adaptation out there? Do you think about, there are various fancy tools you may use. You may use very, very fancy nonlinear models. You might use just a linear specification. You might just pre-specify what they're doing. So there are a lot of different frameworks to try on this. And the agent-based finance world is actually, relative to other areas, pretty good about exploring a lot of stuff. There's no convergence on any one of these. So they can go from very fixed strategies to super-duper nonlinear. I've used neural nets myself. I've also used some other things that are known as classifier systems and all sorts of fancy technology on these. But I often find the simpler technology is often better, going back to that simplicity kind of idea. One problem I think of, the third problem is one I think about a lot too, is you want to think about how people think about the past. They're doing learning, and I will argue any learning problem is going to involve some question about how far into the past you look out there. So if you're learning about trying to figure out something about the future, you're going to have to specify to your agents how far into the past do you want them to do when they're looking at past data. Should it just be yesterday that's relevant? Should it be 2 days? Do you want to have multi-horizons coming together? That's something I look at too. And also information. How do you want them to store their information about the world? How complicated? Do you want to have very elaborate models with lots of information stored about everything, and they have to sort it all out? Or do you want very simple information models where they just store prices or something? Again, you've got complexity versus realism coming to play on all these cases. And then finally, preferences. And this is an interesting question. Most agent-based models and everything you've looked at so far, you'll see today, uses rather standard preferences. Sometimes very simple mean variance myopic preferences, which sort of give us a fairly easy analytically tractable or tractable situation. But do you want it, shouldn't they have some intertemporal, maybe not completely intertemporal optimization, but some thoughts about today versus tomorrow? That turns out to be relatively hard to do. And then the final thing you might want to add for preferences, what about maybe you're a behavioral person and you think they should have some behavioral quirks to them, like loss aversion or something, or some sort of maybe prospect theory sorts of preferences. That can be put in. There's no reason that that's in any way incongruent with the agent-based modeling philosophy. Very few people have done it. I always think the reason we haven't really done it is it adds too many degrees of freedom to what we're doing. We're already doing a lot that's viewed as being pretty radical. Maybe we better not, if we want to already got most people mad at us already. We put in behavioral stuff, we'll get more people mad at us, so we don't do it right now. But there's no reason it couldn't be in there. And that's actually a problem sometimes I think about is, what is there that I'm going to maybe need to expand some more behavioral things to explain? And it sort of sits on my agenda. Okay, a quick history of what these things, before we get into actually simulating one here, running a very easy one. Very quick history. There have actually been two basic flavors of these types of models. And I actually started my life working on this early flavor, which I call the kind of many type or sort of open models. These have multi-agents. They have lots of agents. They're almost always computational. They have a very interesting dynamics. They're I think, very interesting models. These would, but the model in these, in these models, the agents are often modeled as fairly complicated learning models. These might be neural networks. Sometimes they're driven by what's known as a genetic algorithm. And the space to them is sort of completely open in that they look around at data and they try to figure out what's going on. If there's a new trading strategy out there, it might just evolve out of their soup of different strategies. And this is very kind of philosophically very appealing that they're just out there looking for any possible predictability, and if it's there, they're going to try to utilize it. And I think when we were building these models, this was a very appealing, everyone's sort of building, and there are people who still go back to these models and say, geez, those are really cool. And I think in the world of agent-based modeling, all of these, there is something still philosophically kind of neat about, if this is what's really going on in the world. People are searching around through different strategies. They may be trying to take two strategies and smash them together and get a better strategy out there. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it gets thrown away. Very, very kind of elegant But the problem with them is that they're relatively difficult to analyze. They're pretty complicated. There are lots of moving parts going on. And I think in the spirit of much of agent-based modeling, these have not, they've been sort of interesting. They sort of sit out there as kind of interesting thought experiments. And they are, it's amazing we get them somewhat tractable, but they haven't been, they have this analyzation problem. So they've been competed with what I call few agent models, which are much simpler, often involve relatively small set of strategies out there, relatively easy to analyze, and generally have a much simpler dynamics to them. In some cases, you can kind of, in some cases, you can even write down some analytics on these things. You can actually get some pretty good analytic headway. And I've been developing models that are sort of in between these guys, which I call kind of hybrid models, which are kind of a group in between them. And we'll see some of those. But the world of agent-based models, when you look at financial models, you will see either kind of at the extremes, this type and this type out there in the world of modeling. Let me give you an example. Actually, the many-type models, which are now getting older, the references, again, are in the handouts you have. This is actually the old Santa Fe stock market. This was the Santa Fe stock market, which I was involved with way back when. So that has all sorts of fancy bells and whistles. This is an interesting one because it uses a technology known as genetic programming, which in many ways is the most open of all of these computational learning algorithms. It says, I'm just going to start, people's behavior is just described by some equation. I'm just going to keep evolving different equations. It's sort of open. It takes, the equations, the forecasting equations can just be smashed together and they generate new ones. And in the world of sort of open modeling, this is in spirit the most open you can get, but it's also the cost is it's very hard to analyze. The last one was, that was me actually using neural networks eventually, which I also found relatively open and relatively tractable. But I'm going to kind of, I'd love to sort of talk about these, but I'm going to kind of push them aside because I don't think, you don't at the end of the day get as much mileage out of these. At least when I'm starting on a first base course in this, I wouldn't start as your basic intuition from them. They're fairly complicated things. But there are, in spirit, something that's very interesting. So that they have this philosophy, though, of strategies appear, take advantage of the environment. That seems very realistic. People really like that. But you really, one other question, philosophical question, is how well can you really build these sort of open-ended systems? And this is true of all agent-based modeling. So this is great that sort of new stuff is kind of continually appearing. But actually, at the end of the day, anytime you start coding these things, you do have to put in some basic assumptions. Even the Santa Fe stock market had to kind of restrict the agents to certain types of information they were looking at. So philosophically, this dream of being completely open-ended in the world of agent-based modeling is somewhat more of a dream, that you really can't quite achieve that. You are, once you start writing down a model, going to have to do something somewhat restricted. You need to put in some assumptions and structure so that that pure philosophy of just sort of, I'm just going to like write 3 lines of Lisp code or something, and a whole economy is going to kind of emerge out of it. It just doesn't work, really. You need assumptions to get somewhere. So with a few type philosophy, which is sort of different, is you start with a small set of strategies, maybe 2. Few can be as few as 2. Often they have fixed parameters, which bothers some people because they're not exactly learning out there. You sometimes get very analytic results and usually very tractable dynamics. So they might, an example, and we'll keep coming back to this, is that the sort of 2-type model is based on maybe having one guy who's kind of trend following out there. So here's those expectations again. You might build the expectations of person I of future prices as this simple equation here. PT, that's current price, plus PT minus 1, so how that change in price. And G would usually be greater than 0. So it says that it went up in the last period. I'm going to assume it's going to go up again somewhat this period. And I just have kind of an expectation those prices keep on going. And you can either think of this as trend following. It also follows, it basically lines up with adaptive expectations. If you want a very old technology from macro, can occasionally line up with a Kalman filter under certain assumptions. It's pretty fundamental to what goes on. It's obviously also somewhat destabilizing out there. This taking out of control could get pretty bad out there. Now, if you run all of your financial markets based on this alone, you will see instability. You will see too much instability. Everything will blow up. And so the issue is that it kind of has to compete with somebody else. And that somebody else is usually somebody out there who's got to have some sort of fundamental or mean reversion. Somebody has got to say, whoa, wait a sec. Once its price is way out of control, it's got to come back. And so there's usually some sort of fundamental strategy out here. This is an example of one where here there's a fundamental sort of value. This guy says, and remember here v is less than 1, is going to be in 0 to 1. So this person thinks, well, it's probably going to come to the fundamental value, and we'll sort of split the difference. Say v is like 0.5. It'll be somewhere, the next price is going to be somewhere like halfway between current price and fundamental. So he's predicting that it's going to come back. This would predict it's, wherever it is, it's going to start drifting back over to the fundamental. Differing speeds depending on what v is. They're differing, could be differing levels of aggregate of aggression in this as fundamentals. And sitting, we've got these two types up there, and there are only two of them. But I think they often, in many of these markets, form the building block, how these guys interact. They seem really simple and pretty dumb, but the interaction of them is what's really interesting. Yeah.
So how is this heterogeneity endogenous?
I'm going to show you. We'll see. We'll see.
So
in a
it
second.
seems like
well, actually, there are two parts. I'll answer it even a little better than that, other than we'll see. Two parts to it. One, sometimes these parameters, we'll let these parameters sort of be estimated over time. So we kind of let them learn about those parameters. The other element is that these just the actual, in the first model we'll look at, the fraction of the population that follows these different strategies is completely endogenous. So if this one has generally been working in the past, people will glom onto it. If this strategy has been generally working in the better in the past over recent data, people will shift over to that. And so imagine that there's a blob of people moving back and forth between these things. And so that's the sort of first stage of endogeneity, that the population is going to be endogenous. So you can add it. It's definitely coming in at all sorts of levels on this. Okay, there's some history of these models, actually. They go back a long ways. There's an ancient history. Very few people realize it, but these models have been around for a long time. In the 1970s, there's a guy named Zeman who wrote a paper with these types of strategies about stock markets using an ancient technology that was somewhat discredited in the late 1970s. I'm not so sure if its discredit is as necessary as it was, known as catastrophe theory. And he wrote it about stock markets and showed that stock markets, if you really had these strategies out there, could suddenly become can be destabilized and very unstable. And that was sort of, and it sits out there as one of these really kind of papers well ahead of any of these other ones. Not very well known, but it's out there. Another interesting paper from 1988 by Frankel and Fruit actually involves two different strategies. They were also not so well known. And they were sitting there, interestingly enough, in the 1980s. At the end of the 1980s, they were struggling to say, they've been sitting there looking at international macro models, trying to figure out what the hell's going on with the dollar. It's been going up and up and up during the 80s. How do we explain it? And so they sort of throw up their hands. We can't do it with a single agent model. We're going to try these two different types, like trend following and fundamental types, and see what happens. They also had access to a lot of survey information at that time, and they tried to line it up. They were asking people, well, what do you think? Why do you think the price is going to go up? And when you ask people these surveys, well, they say, well, because it went up last period. And so they were bringing to bear surveys, and they were looking at very particular parts of data. Alan Kerman also is a very famous model from the same era, where he was also looking kind of at, he was basing it on a kind of contagion model, sort of built off of epidemics and stuff, where people bounce into each other and kind of or sort of share germs and stuff, but based it in a financial situation. And these were kind of the core of these kind of few type models at that time. These are, or some of the really early history. People have been thinking about these for longer than you think. This was a long time ago. Now, there's a modern set of these things just in your history, and I won't particularly defend any one of these guys or not. There's a lot of them. People use a lot of these. Are all examples of elements of models that use 2 to 3 different strategies, maybe 4 at the most. The references, of course, are there. This is Kars Homus. You can ask him about the Brocken-Homus model is quite famous. A couple others have been used a lot. The Lux and Marchesi model is another one that gets used a lot in various instances. out there for various reasons. Some are easier than to do or harder, but this is I won't particularly, we're going to look at an element sort of closely related to this in 1 second here. Actually, I think I can finish this well, let's set this up. I think I can finish this. This will take me like 1 hour on the first chunk here, and we'll let you out after, because this will be a good place to stop. So this is not here, but let me just show you what one of these looks like. And what we're really looking at is a version sort of the Brocken-Holmes model, but actually slightly, it's actually this one. There's Kars again with Gersendorfer, and it's a nonlinear structural model for volatility clustering. It is sort of based on these. And now we'll see what do these things look like in a very simple model. It's going to have trend-following traders. It has fundamental traders. It bases its clearing price, setting the clearing price based on some sort of market clearing, a Walrasian auctioneer sort of system, and it will have adaptive populations. And you can go back and think, I'll run you through the equations. They're not too bad, but I don't want to throw equations at everybody today. But they're not too bad because the first two here, they've got fundamental and trend followers. And here are those expectations. And those are just what we had before. Up there. There's our fundamental and trend exactly as we had before. There's going to be a well-defined, in their model, and I think this is a little troubling. In their model, there's a fundamental price out there, and everybody kind of knows what it is. So they've kind of figured out the fundamental. I'm not so sure in the real world that's a great assumption, but we'll let it helps simplify the model here. And that's their beliefs, these two equations. This equation comes out of, I won't show you all of their modeling. This comes out of the auctioneer sort of modeling the price determination. For them, if you want to work on it, if you write a relatively stylized model and have an auctioneer out there clearing the market, you can get sometimes a nice, clean, analytic price, and they get that. So it says PT plus 1, that's an interest rate that's in there. It's just set. They have a fixed interest rate. I said these are pretty simple. Is 1 minus NT. Now what's NT? This parameter is important. It's not a parameter. It's part of the model. That's the fraction of the population that uses the fundamental strategy. There it is over there. So what you see is that the future price here, let's just, Y bar is actually related to the dividend. It's actually the expected dividend. Dividend's got a little bit of noise and some expected value, so don't worry about it. That's just a constant. But really the price is determined by effectively how many technical guys there are times their expectation, plus how many fundamental guys there are times their expectation. I won't derive this or anything, but it is actually quite sensible. So it's telling you here that the overall price is a weighted average of these two different expectations. But the key is how does N move over time? And there's the endogenous aspect. And N is going to move depending on how well strategies have done in the past. They also need their demands. This is the preferences part of this model. Their demands are actually what are known as simple constant relative risk aversion, a myopic constant relative risk aversion preferences, where your demand is based on your expectation of the future price. These would be the shares you would demand out there, minus 1 plus R times the current price. So basically as your expected, this is effectively your return or expected return on this asset. If you think it's going to go up more, you buy more. Think it's going to go down, you buy less. Pretty straightforward. It's how much gets controlled by those preferences. They are also sensitive to risk, although in this model they're going to just fix the risk. Gamma is how risk averse you are. It's actually the coefficient of relative risk aversion to the economists out there. This is the variance. They're going to lock that down. They're going to lock down the variance. They don't worry about risk or sort of reassessing risk at all. And this gives them, though, a fairly simple portfolio. This will be the portfolio choice of these agents. Once you see that, why do you need all that stuff? Well, we need that to figure out how well those strategies have done in the past. I'm going to sort of, each period sort of play out what they would have done. So here's how you figure out, these are the returns. Effectively here, these are the returns of the assets. In this world, you can write them, it's effectively the profits, actually, of buying the risky share out there. Of course, you can buy, your whole life is to decide between the risky and risk-free asset out there. And how do you determine how well the strategies have been doing? Here's what you do. They evaluate using these. These are not really utility functions. These are just sort of, think of these as kind of overall profitability of the strategy. It's the return at time t times the portfolio. This is how much of that stock you wanted to buy. So that's how much you wanted to buy. The return at time t, obviously, so that's how well it did at time t. You're playing out the strategy here, both of those two different types of strategies That actually should be a T. I knew one typo would get in here. Sorry about that. That's a T up there. But it's not just looking, here's where past comes into play. It's not just yesterday's performance you want to look at. You want to look at yesterday's performance, plus also look at this as this thing. You look at a kind of weighted average of it. How did it do? How has it been generally doing here? That's sort of my overall performance measure that I had coming into this period. Then I just add, and I'm going to weight it eta. That's sort of how I'm weighting the past. And then I just add the next data point. This is a usual sort of kind of like a Kalman filter kind of learning algorithm here. I've got how I did in the strategy generally did, weighted eta, and then add the next data point coming in. This thing controls how much you're looking at the past. So there's that kind of component of how much do you look. If eta here is pretty big, then you're weighting the past pretty big. Eta is small, you weight it smaller in this thing. And there are the two strategies. So that's how the population you'll see is eventually determined by the relative values of these two things. Let's see how I'm doing. Make sure I'm not holding you over too much here. No. So finally, these models have to then determine, we have to convert these performance. What we have is relative performance measures of the two different strategies. So these are relative ones, and they're sort of averaged over time here, how the different strategies. We need to feed that and convert that into n. So the key equation that a lot of people use, just because it's been kind of useful technology, you can use a lot of different stuff at this point. You just want something that says, well, there are going to be more trend-following guys, if that does well, more fundamental guys, if that's been doing well. Choose an equation that does that. You would be OK. I don't think the dynamics would change that much. They actually, one of the clever things, and this is also part of the Brock and Hummus framework, is to use a basic discrete choice framework or logistic equations from discrete choice economics, because basically people understand some of those equations pretty well. So this is your actual usual discrete choice sort of. It brings in a parameter beta. There's e to the ut, and then it's normalized by this here. That's ut plus uf. This thing is a value between 0 and 1. If this thing, as this thing gets really big relative to uf, this thing approaches 1. If this thing gets really small relative to uf, this thing approaches 0. There's nothing more subtle to understand about this. That's really what it's doing. If it's big, the performance of the trend-following guys are big. There are going to be a lot of them. The trend performance of them is small. There are going to be few of them. They do in this then, in their model, I have to admit, there's one little quirk at the end. I think this still does not have great stability properties. And some of these models, when you look down under the hood, they sometimes have another little quirk. And they do have one here. They don't use this n tilde as their n. They use this here, and they adjust n tilde by this. So what's going on here? This is pt minus its fundamental. What they had needed to do is have this little adjustment. So that's saying how far is the price from the fundamental. And if the price gets really far from the fundamental, so the market is like way out of control, even the technical trend following guys start to go, it's getting too crazy out here. We're getting out of it. And so some of these models have to do this. They have to say that eventually some of these trend following guys have to back out as if I get really, really far from that fundamental. Their beliefs are that they need to back out. And I think I have to go ask Karts, he's in the other room, why they need this. But I think generally this is usually necessary to sort of make sure that these things don't blow up. And that actually is a problem. I always say as a builder of these things, the biggest problem is not that they're too stable, that they often blow up. Yeah.
I think that's the central point, because otherwise you would have instability.
You would have,
because everyone would choose the momentum strategy if it. Yeah.
It will just eventually completely feed on itself.
Yeah.
And there was nothing that will pull the market back to the fundamental, because it's just going up and it'll take off and explode. This will become explosive.
All right.
And it is a design problem. And it's not a problem then. I mean, it's something you need. That's the deal is, you're taking this clearly destabilizing belief system and you need something to sort of bring it back in to stabilize it. And that's always the modeling thing that you're after here. And so it's kind of core to this modeling approach. Let's just see. I know I'll let you guys go. Or not letting you go, but I'll kick into a break. But let me show you what this thing looks like. It's a good place to stop. This is the model run. These are prices on the top, and these are the number. This is the fraction. The bottom is the fraction of trend followers down on the bottom, NT. Now this is this is using their parameters. I just ran this myself. Actually, it's quite easy. It works. I'm doing nothing they don't know about. I'm really replicating. Now, of course, this doesn't look a whole lot like a lot of financial prices you've seen, unless you're looking at markets I don't look at. The market certainly goes, you can see sort of here's a matter of fact, downtrends are just as good as uptrends. So when it's sort of trending down here, these guys kind of come shooting up to 1. And then when there are a whole bunch of them, they get too many, it just sort of like crashes, boom, like that. And then we start up again on another little trend here, and it comes, these guys, you can see them picking up on the trend. Then there all of a sudden hits a ton of these guys at a certain critical threshold, boom. And so it's it clearly settles into kind of a limit cycle-like behavior, which it does. That's not true of all of these models. Some of them can look somewhat actually generate what's known as real chaos. In other words, it will be interesting pattern, but not as predictable as this. But it certainly doesn't look like a real stock market. And it's actually true. One of the problems when you come back to these models, since they're really only driven, the only parameter that's really important to this is this NT guy out there. That's the fundamental driving force. And there's really only one of them. They can't do a whole lot in terms of kind of sort of complexity here. They're always going to look relatively simple in terms of their dynamics. So as a plain sort of no-noise model, they're interesting dynamics and seem kind of relevant, but probably not that realistic. So the solution to this, to get something that's realistic, is to add some noise. And so these guys will often add, and they do this in this paper. The only difference out here is this is the usual pricing equation. The model's now going to be exactly the same, but we add a little blast of noise on the end here. So a little bit of sort of additive noise to this thing. And then what do we see? Now we run the same model. See something that could be vaguely believable as stock prices. I always hate people who sort of write kind of random looking plots and say, well, that looks like a stock price. They do much more than this. This is not, so I don't have, they will show you, I will certainly show you the returns, which are right down here. These are the stock returns. And I wanted to emphasize, if you looked at distributions, you can see some very large moves. They do exhibit some very extreme moves. There's also an element of volatility persistence. So you see this sort of packet of kind of high volatility over here. And there's another blob of kind of high volatility, and then periods of relative quiet. The model does that. And they do extensive testing of that in the papers. It's not like they're not testing all this stuff. So this model sort of meets a lot of the requirements of generating some of those short-term features out there. Once we add some noise to it, it seems to be there. What do the fractions of traders look like in this world? Interesting. So this is the same price series. It's kind of interesting. What goes on in this world is the trend followers are often 0 and then often occasionally shoot up and then shoot back down, which I am a little worried about as to how realistic this is. But that's what it does in their paper and what this model does. They sort of jump up and then jump back down again in this. But I would say the volatility periods, which you can't really see, are mostly clumped where these packets of a lot of trend following activity sit. So remember this, and because this is a very different pattern from what we saw with no noise. Now we add noise, we get something very realistic in terms of prices. Maybe, I don't know if this is realistic or not, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, well, about to take a break here. I'm almost on schedule. We can see here with these few types, and it's true, and this is not just true of their model. I use their model as a representative stand-in for a broad set of these kind of few type models. You don't have to work too hard to get sort of these basic price dynamics. This two-strategy core dynamics seems somewhat reasonable. You can add a couple others, and it doesn't change the results much. The other models, as I said, other models are similar. It does require noise to be added to get sort of these realistic price swings. And it does give us, and unfortunately it gives us this other weird feature, whether it's realistic or not. We do seem to generate these large erratic swings in the strategy fractions themselves. And that's sort of interesting, but is it realistic or not, is an interesting question. So I think this is a good time let's take a break, and we'll come right back in 10 minutes or so. So I'll get going again. So we've seen, here we go again, we're on to part 2. You're back. The coffee, was the coffee out there? I didn't even see that. Good. I will try to make it there next time. We're on to part 2. Part 2 here is really to look at more detail about adaptation and time series, and something I refer to as heterogeneous gain learning. So I actually have been building one of these hybrid models that's sort of in between the few type, many type models, and trying to understand a little bit more about the details. I built it actually as a learning tool. It's taken on more of a, as happens with these things, it's taken on a little more of a life of its own, because it seems, I thought it would be just kind of a crude little learning model. It wouldn't really do much. But it's actually been pretty effective at replicating on the replicating time series feature side, and also interesting in kind of getting into more of the depth of what's really going on or inside these models about how strategies are playing against each other and how do they compete. And are there some deep economic ideas that can come out of these? So this is sort of the economics chunk of the talk. As I mentioned, a couple of people after the last one, we will come back to sort of the future directions in the last part of the talk. So this is the most economics oriented, and we'll also see a lot of time series go by in this section here. We're going to look at a structure of a model, back to this question of learning in time series, some simulations, back to these large swings from fundamentals, which I think are also an important part of this, some more speculative thoughts on momentum, risk and return. And since it's a macro meeting, I do have a little section on consumption. I will caution you that it's not, these models are not great yet on consumption. And we'll wrap up this section. Okay, this is a little bit of overlap, but just remind you, this problem is the sort of big picture. Well, it is, I love this picture, so I keep using it. This is really what's going on in these models, essentially. And this is a model that's going to have a much more, the ones you've seen so far, the simple one really wasn't a lot of that. There, yes, time series features. It does have this. We had time series features feeding back into strategy populations, the NT, that was it here. NT is here. That generates future time series, and this thing sort of feeds on itself. Now we're going to see a kind of richer version of this. Remind you here again, you had this before, another reminder from last time. This is like designed for people to be, if you had during the coffee break, if you forgot these facts, here they are again. These were the short-term features of data. Now we're going to really look at all of these. Actually, we look at all of these things this time. All we've really looked at, and rather casually, was this. And I am kind of casually, although I do admit that to Kars Homas and Gersendorfer and Holmes, they do look at all of these features in their model. Actually, their model generates all three of these features. And as I said, many other, that's not particular to them, many other models generate that. We're going to try to tackle some of these here too. But we'll see how they also, while looking at these features, keep looking under the hood of these models to see how the learning dynamics are connected. And I think there's some universal things that are not particular to this model, I hope, out there that are going on. There are some other models that look at long-range features, and if I had like another 30 minutes, I would put these in. This is actually, Kars Homas is also one of the et al. In this one. They have a kind of take a few type model and fit it to very long-range data, basically. I think it's annual or quarterly US data. It's a few type model. They estimate it. Only problem there is it's very much just a long horizon model. They're looking at only the long horizon features. But if I had 30 minutes more, that's probably the next model I would talk about. And several people have applied this in other areas, including real estate, commodities prices. Very interesting model out there. The one we're going to look at is the other one that I sent you, which is one I've built here, which looks, the advantage here, it's a little more complicated. Disadvantage, it's more complicated, has lots of different time horizons going on. We're going to see that, a sort of fancier evolutionary story. And it also, it's going to look at features, of time series features all over the place. But I also think it's a kind of more richer evolutionary model. So what is this thing going to look like? So let's build it here. It's going to look, we've already got some of these pieces. It's going to have here, sitting in a minute, it's going to have at its core adaptive and fundamental types. So you've already got that. And I think sitting in it somehow, its dynamics are relatively complicated, but sitting in the core is the battle between these two types going on out there, and it's going to be part of this. But they're going to be a little more heterogeneous. We're not going to have just two strategies out there. They're going to have different perspectives on the past. Remember that parameter that had to do with the past? That to me is, I refer to that often as a gain level. It connects over to what's known as the Kalman gain in Kalman filtering. It is nothing more, though, than this weighting issue of how do you weight the past. So do you look at, if you're trying to build a strategy, should you think about just the past year of returns, the past 10 years of returns, the past 30 years of returns? I think this is very important, and how those things, there's no one answer to this, and how those things compete with each other in the real world is very, very critical. I sometimes think about this about learning about stationarity in the data. If you think the data that you're looking at is truly stationary, you should use as much data as possible. But if you think that really it's a new world, that all the old stuff, it's a new economy, stupid, then you should probably only be using the past 2 or 3 years or 5 years of data. There's no great, if you talk to people on Wall Street, there's no great answer to this. And so I let all of them sort of play against each other. The other feature that you'll see in this is I'm going to have agents learning about return and risk, and I think that's important. There are several types of agent-based models that attempt this, and I think that's very important out there in these modeling. And you'll also see a lot of rich dynamics about who lives and who dies, survival, and the basically overall survival of different strategies is going to be very important. And what fraction of strategies actually tend to adjust in the long run is very, very important and critical to this. Now, this model also has connections to some other economic ideas. So to the economists out there, you probably have seen some of these things, but you'll see here in great detail, something known as the limits to arbitrage idea is going to appear. That's a standard idea in finance, which says, well, there are rational people out there. There are these fundamental traders who should probably, come in and stabilize markets. But maybe they're just not quite enough of them out there. And they're sort of limited in their resources. And that's a kind of deep idea. That will appear here in this model a lot, so keep an eye on it. There's also an idea that noise trader risk, there's an idea that some traders these smart traders may hold back just because there are lots of crazy people out there. That's my interpretation of noise trader risk. There are all these crazy people. Yes, I'd like to come in and play fundamental trader and stabilize stuff, but I'm scared because they're nuts out there. That's sort of. And I also think a lot about, I'm a sort of defiant fan of Hyman Minsky, who talks a lot about financial instability. I have not an element of his instability, and that's not his entire theory, but that as bubbles and crashes sort of move around, there are movements in perception about risk. As you get to the top of a bubble, people's perception about risk basically is very low, that they feel like the world is very safe. The bottom, after you've had a crash, their perception swings in the other direction. They go kind of completely crazy. The world is totally falling apart. I'm scared. And if you read inside Minsky, that actually sits. There's a lot of other things in his theory, many of them involving leverage and money creation and all sorts of things. But he also has this idea about perceptions of risk moving over time. So here's the model in 2 seconds. So we'll try to go through this. I won't go all the details in it, but we'll give a kind of quick picture. The economy, the agents, their rules, how do they trade, and how do they evolve. The economy is like the other one we just saw, very simple, straightforward. There's actually just a stock and a risk-free asset. And to tell you the truth, that's what many of these models look like. It pays a stochastic dividend. The difference here, that dividend actually follows a random walk and grows over time. The growth and volatility are calibrated to US aggregate data for dividends. So we're going to try here now to line up a little better with real data. So we have one stock, a dividend, and actually US dividend levels they're not far off a random walk. And actually also mention that they're relatively quiet here. They do move around, but they're a relatively stable, sort of trending up kind of object. The stock here will be in finite supply. There's one share out there. Everyone holds fractional shares. And our objective is going to be to clear this market for all our demands. The price all the time will be then endogenous here. There's going to be an endogenous price out there determined by our demands for this stock. But we are after really kind of calibrating up. The core of this problem is to say we're going to take something, goes to macro too. We're going to take something, there is one macro shock here, but that macro shock is well calibrated to a rather small macro shock that I'm after here, the growth and volatility of actual dividends. But that will be it for sort of macro shocks. There are a bunch of other micro shocks independent across agents, but this is the only aggregate shock. There's a risk-free asset. I used to apologize a lot for that. It's actually, this is a kind of curious part of the model. It's actually, in infinite supply and set to 0 just for, makes things a little easier to interpret in this model. I was not trying to calibrate it to current interest rates in any way. I've been using this model for a long time. And I've watched reality converge to my model over time. I used to apologize a lot for this. Now people say, oh, you must just be setting it to 0 because that's what they are. I said, no, it's I started doing this when this was closer to 2% or so. I do occasionally, it's not actually hard to set that a little higher. But the data has converged to this model, not because the model's right, I think, just because time has gone by. Demand for shares. This is going to look a lot like what we just looked at. Actually, the preferences are very similar. They're constant relative risk aversion preferences. Traders, though, need to build two parts. Their learning component needs to give them two components. They have to figure out the expected return and the expected variance. And that they're going to convert into some demand for shares. So they're doing a risk-return calculation. And in general, I think you could put in whatever function, a kind of reasonable function here that says this is your fraction of savings that you're going to put in the stock market. And here's your return, here's your risk. And of course, if these have the appropriate signs that your demand goes up as your expected returns go up, your demand goes down as the risk goes up, probably lots of other things would work here. But I put in here I do stay, looks familiar, and it should be familiar. This is the constant relative risk aversion, myopic constant relative risk aversion preferences, where it is the expected return on the stock market minus the risk-free divided by gamma, the coefficient of relative. That controls how risk averse they are, and that's their expectation of variance. Effectively, it's the same demands you just saw in that last model. The only key big difference, well, of course, this is in return space, little different, but also, the other difference is that they're trying to figure out what the risk level is. Yeah? Yep. Move the mic around there.
On the previous slide, when you have the risk-free rate at 0, when it's actually now negative, how would that fit into the model? There's a cost of
yeah, I'm not sure I would say, I can take small positive interest rates okay. I'm not so sure what would happen to my model with a negative interest rate. I'm a little, so I'm not, that's another problem. But I will say, right up front, this is not a great model, because it's fixed here. This is not a great model for, and so you're a lot of macroeconomists there. I must apologize. This is not a great model for dynamics of the real interest rate, because we sort of have it fixed and low. But that's sort of a necessary future thing to start working on. How does the dynamics of the interest rate move around with the market? To really get the dynamics of the interest rate, then you do want to build more of a macro model around this thing. So let me put out that apology. OK, back to here are our demands here. The shares, so your shareholdings will be your demand. And actually, is that in here? Ooh, it's missing. Agents consume at any given time, they invest in the market. They're going to consume lambda fraction. This is where this is also not a very good macro model. Take this line, should be earlier. They're going to consume lambda fraction of their current wealth, which is actually just in the shares of the stock and the bonds. And they're going to consume this fraction of wealth here, lambda times this. And then the opposite, what is left is their savings, 1 minus lambda times alpha times wealth. That's the amount, dollar amount you're going to invest in the stock market. Divided by PT, you've got the share, that will be your share demand at time t. The fraction that you're going to put in cash or bonds is, again, savings times 1 minus alpha. The rest you put, what you don't put in the stock market, you're going to put in some kind of bond holdings that, of course, earn this rather miserable 0 interest rate out there. And that's sort of the whole deal of the this is the economics of this model. Now the model has a much stronger intertemporal linkage going on than some of the other agent-based models, and that's important to me. I want this to have it is, in terms of budget and stuff, this is a fully blown intertemporal model. We have bonds going through time, shares going through time, and some agent-based models do this, some don't. But consumption is somewhat of a sideshow here. They just kind of consume a constant fraction of wealth. You need to do that because you need to draw their resources going into this economy through the dividends. We need to pull those resources out. This will also be, in this model, the mechanism that sort of keeps bubbles from kind of exploding is really this. If eventually, if a market keeps shooting up, the price is going up, everyone's wealth is going up, and these consumption levels will be the consumption has to come from something. It has to come from some resource in this economy, which is purely being generated by these dividends coming in. So I always say, you know, that at the top of a peak, everyone's out there trying to buy, you know, buy like a BMW or something, and eventually they can't all do it. And the market eventually, that has to bring bubbles back into line. So if nothing else stops them, this will operate here. That may be not the most perfect model of consumption, but it is eventually someone's got to consume something somewhat relative to wealth. There's obviously in the real world a much fancier thing, which macroeconomists can't agree on anyway. Okay, forecasting is the whole deal here. So what do they do for forecasts? These first two will be the ones you're used to. There are actually 4 families out there of forecasters. Adaptive, mean reverting, noise traders, and a buy and hold type. And so I've gone to 4, not 2. We're adding more. These guys sort of play a slightly different role. They're sort of sitting there on the side. But let me talk about that. There are also variance forecasts. The adaptive guys are very similar to the last time, even though their equation looks a little different. They predict the future return as a weighted average of their forecast last period times the current return that they've just observed. And it's weighted by this G level, which is gain level. And that controls how much weight do you put on the current return, R, in there. How much do you look, and this controls how far in the past are you looking. So you've seen a high return. This is, of course, going to boost up your return. It is very similar to that kind of trend following. It could be adaptive. You could think of it as a Kalman filter if you like that. All of those things, they all come and fall into something that looks like this. You can't, I like to think of this, when I'm doing these models, they're things you can't escape. And this is one you can't escape. They all kind of will look the same. Someone's thinking that PT plus 1 is greater than, expectation PT plus 1 greater than PT. That's how it sits here. Now notice there is heterogeneity across these gain levels here, so people don't have the same parameter. We'll allow that. The mean reverting guys this time will be a little more sophisticated. I'm actually going to have them running regressions. Now in the world of finance, we're thinking about mean reversion. People like to do stuff like look at the price-dividend ratio. So where is the price relative to the dividend? And use that as their forecasting instrument. So if the price is really high relative to the dividend, the regression should pick up that it's coming down. If it's really low relative to the dividend, regression should pick up that it's going to revert and come back. And this converts into, usually they run these regressions in logs. And so I'm going to run a little regression. These guys estimate their parameter by running this regression here. So that's the log price-dividend ratio minus the overall average mean level, and that's a long-run average mean return. And they estimate this using a rather plain method called recursive least squares. It is like running kind of online. Those of you who have seen learning models, it's very common. This is a very common technology. It's like running online OLS. It's like you're running ordinary least squares, but sort of continually to adapt it over time. And it also is driven by a gain parameter, which tells you how much you've run this least squares regression, you got a new data point, how much weight do you put on that new data point? This thing controls this. If it's low, you don't put much weight on the new data point. If it's high, you take the new data point very seriously. So here's, you know, this model has, at this level, a lot more adaptation going on and learning going on at the level of these. Before we just had these things fixed. Now we're letting these parameters. This obviously makes the model much more complicated. The other rules, so those are actually the 2 key types. There they are, adaptive, mean reverting fundamental types. That doesn't change. There are these 2 other types which I'll just quickly give you a picture of that I call noise traders and buy and hold traders. Let's start with the buy and hold guys. They're kind of interesting. I put in here kind of a passive strategy, which I think is important. You know, in a world of efficient markets, if we think there's really efficient markets going on, we should think one possibility is just do nothing, kind of, or just sort of estimate long-run averages and sort of hold a portfolio consistent with that. That's what these guys do. They just estimate long-run means and variances and sort of hold that overall portfolio. And I think that's an important benchmark. They should be in, we'll sort of see them too, what role they play. And then one other type, which is essentially necessary here to take care of a lot of short-run. You remember that I said the key empirical feature of markets is there's this short-run unpredictability. Well, I put in a set of traders to exactly capitalize on it. These guys are going to try to take advantage of short-run predictability and returns. And all they do is run a short-run linear forecast. Basically regress returns on lagged returns. Much of this model is going to be run at the weekly horizon. So they're sort of looking for very short-run correlations and trying to take advantage of it. And actually what happens is they also run recursive least squares models. And they actually do. They do a very good job of driving out the kind of short-run correlations. They take advantage of them, and then they also effectively put themselves out of business. And they're not really, in the world of noise traders, I don't think of these guys as really noise. I don't actually even like noise traders much. These guys are quite purposeful. They're not really noisy, but they are making the returns look relatively unpredictable at the short horizon, which is, of course, the feature we see. So instead of just adding noise, I actually have sort of a purposeful trader out there. And then finally, final piece is variance. And I think of them here, instead of having a lot of different families of variance forecasts, I really think there's only one way. Well, I think there are a lot of ways to estimate expected returns. I think there's really only one way to kind of estimate volatility, and that's sort of an adaptive kind of forecasting where you're just going to look at squared returns, or effectively squared forecast errors, return minus your forecast, and then do the same kind of adaptive forecasting technique where you look at, here's that error squared last time, plus what your forecast was going in there, and then we weight it with the gain parameter. And I think this is it's obviously a pretty standard way to estimate variance. There may be some other technologies out there, but in the world of estimating risk, there are not many different ways to do it. Now this is simple, for us it's good because it's a very simple adaptive forecasting system. Those of you who know about a few of these models in finance, this is very close to what's known as a GARCH 1-1 kind of model, and it's also close to something that's known as the risk metrics approach, which people use on Wall Street for this, which is just a weighted average of past squared returns. It is going to be similar across agents. So I think when people think they see large variance go up, they're all going to kind of do this together. So their world of risk is not so heterogeneous. They will have a heterogeneous gain parameter, but they are kind of using similar approaches. Now that heterogeneous gain parameter, I'll remind you one other curious thing about it. It can refer to horizon and memory here, because it controls how far back into time you look. But it also is related to the signal-to-noise ratio out there. Variance, of course, here, risk is not something you observe. You never, no one tells you technically what the variance is out there. And so in a world that has a high amount of noise relative to signal, that actually suggests using a very small gain. If you think that the signal is relatively large relative to the noise, that would be a relatively high gain. I just want to say that this issue of whether this is memory or signal-to-noise ratio, it's not clear. Could be both, or some part, and that could be what drives, people will have differing beliefs about what they're seeing coming in on this data. So the market has a picture. What does it look like? There's a whole bunch of people out there, agents, it's an agent-based model, and the rules are quite separate from them. And they sit out there trying to choose the best rule out there. The rules are sort of out there competing with them, and the agents are, from time to time, they rewire themselves and go out and look through the set of rules and try to find the one that would have worked best for them over the recent past. And that's the dynamics in this model, is you've got the rules there, they're generating recommended portfolios. The rules have to be completely honest through time and say, if you had followed me, you can't have like these hedge funds that start out of nowhere and have no history. These guys exist, and they say, if you had followed me, this is how you would have done. And so the agents look at that, and then they make choices across the different rules according to their well-defined utility functions in this, using differing levels of past data. This is sort of like the NT part of the previous model, but it's a little more complicated. These gain levels then in this, I do a lot of experiments with differing types. I also map all these gain levels into half-lives, which means in notation, when I call it like a 50-year half-life, that means you weight data 50 years ago half as much as you weight data today. If I say 18-year half-life, that means 18 years ago, that's half the weight that you give today. When I actually use a rather small set of gain parameters on these things, I'll use just 5 different half-lives. So here's a guy who just 1 year ago, this is a pretty short-term type, right? 1 year ago gets half the weight of today. Now that's dropping off your weighting pretty quickly. This guy's really just looking for short-term sort of stuff. I do other experiments. I won't show them to you today. I actually do an experiment where I say, look, everyone just use 50 years half-life. Take a very long perspective. And actually, if you run the market at that level, it's kind of boring. It actually converges to what looks effectively like a kind of stable equilibrium. So if you can get rid of these guys out here, this mechanism, all of the learning mechanisms sort of work. I mean, if you someone asked me, like, how can I make these markets stable? Well, you sort of just have to get rid of all these people out here and these beliefs. Now, I'm not saying in any way that's realistic, but it's actually a very good benchmark test of this model to say, what's driving, at least underneath it, what is driving some of the instability is it's coming from these shorter horizon beliefs. I totally believe these are part of the world, and they continue, and in the markets, once they're all there, they thrive against each other. They don't, nothing about evolution that drives them away. But if you were to sort of come in from up above and take them away, the market would converge. There's also, sometimes I do experiments where I just have high gain types, in other words, the very short-term types. Those generate a lot of instability, but almost too much instability, as you might imagine. They kind of don't look in any way realistic. So I do that too. That's just to remind you what gain weightings, if you're still saying, what are these gain things? Those are two different gain levels. This is a smaller one, which says, okay, this is going into the past. This is how its weights would be going out into the past. Here's a kind of larger gain. Its weights drop off more quickly. And really what's going on underneath is we're looking at overall competition between these types battling against each other. This is the world also here. There are the different rules. They're actually, since there are 5 different gain levels for the adaptive types, the fundamental types, there's basically a 5x5 matrix of strategies here. So there's a lot of strategies. Noise is the same way. Buy and hold, they just run on long range stuff. So there's only, that's a 1x1. That means there's just one in there. And then our agents really are sitting, they're sitting inside these boxes in different places. They will choose a rule here, but when they wake up to choose another rule, they might choose to move over here. They could move from this adaptive guy to being this buy and hold guy and wake up and say, darn, I should have been a buy and hold. It would have worked better for me. And that's how they operate. But that's what the model, as a sort of snapshot from up above, that's what it looks like. Trading, this is also very similar to the model I showed you before, although it's much more computationally intensive. I basically take the shared demands that once I write down all of those learning, when I've got those expectations, I actually know their parameters, I can actually figure out the demand for shares of each agent I as a function of the current price. And the auctioneer, this is an auctioneer-based market, comes in and says, okay, what price clears? Remember, there's one share total in the market. So it says, okay, take the demand of each individual, sum it up, and clear that market. And that has to be done numerically. There's no way to, there's no easy analytic to do that. So this is stylized across trading, and we're going to do it numerically. And I have to admit, the computer, underneath all this thing, probably spends about, as a practical matter, spends roughly 90% of its compute time doing this. This is, I wish, this is the algorithm to work harder. It's relatively good, but this is hard work for the computer to figure, because it's got to do a search across prices to find this. A couple other parameters, just to, if you're interested in all sorts of parameters. The most interesting, this is the coefficient of relative risk aversion. It's going to be 3.5. You could either go down to as low as about 3 up to 4, and you probably have very similar results. Get really low, and it gets kind of crazy, and you get really high, and also would be. But this is by macro, people who sort of believe in these numbers, that's not crazy. This is the ratio of wealth to consumption. I find, actually, if you look at the macro literature, there's such a wide range of this, depending on what you put into wealth, that it's hard to tell what's a reasonable number for that. This is in the range, but I'd say that range is enormous. The number of agents that will be in the simulation, this runs basically the number that will run overnight on my computer, so about 16,000. So now instead of 2, we have got a lot more rules in there. The rule space is at 4,000. So obviously we're running with a lot more people in here. This is the drift on the dividend, which is, again, these are calibrated to US data. And those are the gain levels, which we've talked about before. So those are sort of the basic parameters going in. What does this thing look like if we run it? Here we go. This is the basic plot, which has a lot of things going on. Those are prices up in the top window, returns, middle, and actually trading volume, which I think is always very interesting. Matter of fact, I got involved in agent-based stuff because I thought a lot about trading volume and needed models to generate it. You can notice a couple things. Obviously, you can see kind of clumped volatility down here, periods of high volatility, periods of relatively low volatility. Here, that was one of our stylized features out there. The market also appears to demonstrate sort of an asymmetric movements up here. It kind of slowly drifts up and then comes down rather suddenly, which these drop-offs seem to be connected to periods of rather high volatility. I guess I can call those crashes, but I'll be careful how often I use that word. But you sort of see these slow up, fast down, and then maybe it starts up on another one, comes down, and each time it's sort of lined up. And at the top of these things, you also see periods of relatively low volatility as it's going up to the top. All of these features are interesting and are going to kind of feed back into some of the learning. They're somewhat realistic, but they also feed in to some of the learning models. So keep those in mind. Remember those things, that you kind of have this asymmetry in the up and down markets, and it looks like you get kind of a volatility and also trading volume kicking up in these periods when the market kind of drops off. So keep those loaded as features that the model, this is the simulation, not the data, that the simulation generates. This is actually, these are 50, sorry, those are years too on the x-axis. So that's 50 years of simulated data. We're taking time very seriously here because this is calibrated to data that's also hit on time. So we want to think of that as a 50-year span of time. Although the model is simulated at a weekly horizon. Okay, let's compare it to some data. This is a little more better data set than I used. This, of course, much of this model is in that paper I gave you. But since I wrote that paper, I've developed some better data. I'm always pushing the data side. Actually, I actually am a very empirical guy. And I started much of my work in time series, financial time series. And so I'm always trying to get better data and generate better time series. So I've taken a whole bunch of data sets and sort of smashed them together to build an even longer series of data. I use what in the US is the gold standard for stock returns, which is the CRSP valuated index. To go back farther, I want to go back to 1871. I also pull in the Shiller long-range time series, which actually goes from 1871 to current time. And if you want to do this, you could certainly that's free and it's on Shiller's website. This, unfortunately, you have to pay these guys a bunch of money for. And then actually, if you want to go back farther, this is at the monthly, or actually it's I use the annual version of that, actually I use the monthly version of that. And if you want to get daily data going back to 1886, you can use a data set by Bill Schwert, which will get daily returns going back to 1886. I generally use daily returns to get volatility estimates. I'm also using, in some of the things, I will be using a risk-free interest rate. For the really old, for modern stuff, obviously use stuff from the Federal Reserve. For really old stuff, I use this rate from this is a website called Measuring Worth out there where they have one version. I don't know. I know there are a whole bunch of macroeconomists. I'm not sure whether I trust risk-free rates back here, but that's the one I'm using. I'm going to be using returns, excess returns, price-dividend ratios, and realized volatility. When I estimate monthly, I'm going to have monthly series of volatility where I use the daily returns to build a variance over a given month. That's known as what in finance lingo is known as a realized volatility measure. You take a kind of high-frequency data set and just use it to build volatility over a certain time horizon. So that's the data. When you're looking at real data, it's coming from this. The simulations that I will use, what I do is I take it and I run it for 100,000 weeks. And then I just that's to let all kinds of early transients, and this is a problem, to let, in the beginnings of these models, where you start them, weird things go on, and you kind of want those things to disappear. You want to kind of hopefully stabilize into at least something that's sort of reasonable. So I let it run for a long time before I even start gathering data. Then I start gathering data, so I run for 100,000 weeks. And then I gather data over the last 100,000 weeks, which corresponds to roughly, that's not the year 1900, that's 1900 years worth of data. So one thing that's great, of course, about computer simulations, we may have all kinds of problems here. But one of the great things we've got in the world of simulation is you can have as much data as you want. You just run the computer longer. So, data is not a problem. I've got more data than I know what to do with. So we'll use that here. So all the simulations you'll see are generally coming from this sort of stuff. Okay, just to remind you what some of that real data, I've been blabbering about fundamentals. So I better tell you what the real data looks like in terms of movements around fundamentals. And I always think it's interesting. It's a little trickier than you might imagine. This is the S&P price-dividend ratio out there. Actually, I didn't paste in the Shiller data. That's interesting. So I'm stopping it. This is the crisp version of this. Stops in 1926. But you see, it makes these big swings. Goes up to occasionally up, pushes up towards 30. This is the Great Depression. It drops way down to a little over 10. You know, it's doing these loop-de-loops. But it's not as regular as you might think. It's not exactly cyclical or something. It's a really tricky series. Goes up for the 60s for a long chunk of time, then it still keeps that. Then, of course, drops in the 80s. And then it just goes totally nuts here in the 90s. It really did do this. It goes up to about 85 at the top of the dot-com bubble. And then, of course, comes blasting back down. And I think if I had the recent data, it is, of course, turning around and coming back up again. But, you know, yes, it takes these big swings. They're not as regular, though, I think, as the lore would have you think. You know, I actually have a picture of the wacky things that I do. I have a picture of this up on my wall, and I stare at it from time to time, trying to figure out what's going on. You can, of course, also look at earnings, and they're pretty much the same thing. They're a little less out of control here. For the model I'm looking at, you know, I could look at prices and dividends or prices and earnings. They're basically the same thing in terms of this theoretical model. Obviously, the real world, they're a little different. But, oh, actually, this is good because it's pasted in with Shiller's data. So this is going back to 1871. So it's erratic. It's moving around through time. It's not exactly a regular pattern out there. Now, what comes out of the data versus the data? Fat tails. These are histograms of weekly returns. Top one is the actual data. This is the simulation. So the simulations actually quite reliably generate the fat-tailedness in the data. We see some very extreme large returns. The red line is a normal distribution superimposed, both cases. Actually, the simulation's a little more fat-tailed than the actual data. And that actually, some of these features, these simulations often do more than the actual data. You know, they're more fat-tailed and have more volatility persistence. And that's kind of, maybe it's because the model is so stylized, or maybe there's something fundamentally wrong. I don't know. These are autocorrelations. Yeah? Are these which returns are? Oh, would you like the sort of log-log plots of these? Because you're thinking about a scaling exponent sort of thing, or what they look like in the extreme tails. They do fit roughly on the tail shape, sort of reasonable, except if you really go out there, you'll again see that the tails in the actual data, the extreme tails, you would see on the log plot more clearly that they're thinner here in the real data than they are for the simulation. That question is, you know, these tails are really hard to see sometimes. You really can't see what's going on. If you put these into log-log space, it's easier to analyze those. There are also people who believe, and I'm somewhat true in the data, there is a reasonable kind of power law scaling-like relationship. I'm sometimes a little iffy about whether it's really there, but it looks reasonably close, but it's not perfect in terms of alignment on these things. These are the autocorrelations, which are basically zero. These are correlations of the weekly data, basically zero for both. These are the now this is volatility. So this is the persistence of volatility. These are simple time series autocorrelations. The correlations, of course, these are correlations. Autocorrelations are just correlation of RT plus 1 here, going out many different lags. This is 25 weeks here. So they're both pretty much zero. Oops, where'd I go? And this is volatility. So we're looking at the correlation. This is monthly volatility. So we're looking at the correlation, basically the variance in month t, with the variance in month t plus 1, t plus 2, t plus 3, t plus 4. They're all positive. This is the red is the US data set. Blue is the simulation. They're positive. The two things is they're clearly positive, which means the volatility is persistent. And they go out for a really long ways here. That's 25 months. So that's like 2 years. And it's true. In the US data, I said that this was sort of a weird feature because it seems to be present both at the short horizon and the very long horizon. It's not clear. It's a kind of short and long horizon phenomenon out there. And the simulation does both, too. It gets you both the short horizon and the long horizon feature of that, or this very long persistence. Volatility is persistent, and it's very persistent in both. Just if you actually want to look at something simpler, like the actual excess return. So these are returns minus the risk-free. That's the merged US data there. It's about overall average over the period's about 7.5%. Simulation 8.4. Simulation tends to be a little high on that. That's OK. Standard deviations, similar comparison. I hate the fact that is not a typo, but I don't think that's just a random effect. It wouldn't obviously be that close. And as a matter of fact, many simulations have a little more negative autocorrelation than the actual data. That's autocorrelation of annual returns. And I'll sort of come back to that. Actually, a lot of other simulations tend to have a slightly higher standard deviation than the actual data. But not bad. We're in the right ballpark on these. I'm not going to claim they're in any way. And I'm not doing estimation, but they're sort of in the right ballpark. So let's get in detail of the dynamics of what's going on and this issue of swings from the fundamentals. So now, this is the same 3-panel plot, but instead of, now I've got it out to 100 years here because I want to look a little more. But on the upper panel, instead of the price, that's the price-dividend ratio. So it's the ratio of the price to the dividend, which is that key measure of kind of the sort of our swings around that fundamental. And there they are. Here's our returns here. You can see them doing that pattern again. Price goes up relative to the fundamental, volatility gets kind of low. When it drops down rather suddenly, and that causes an increase in return volatility. You can clearly see those pockets of high volatility in there occurring generally after the market, basically around market crashes. Now, I mean, much of that's being driven by these very large returns. Downward returns are being fed into the volatility forecasting. Volume is doing the same thing, moving around in the same way, very low at the top, high at the bottom on these things. So if you ran, this of course is the kind of regressions. People then use this to forecast data. And actually in finance it's very common to forecast of future returns on price-dividend ratios. And let's compare the data to, we're going to run this regression. Returns t+1 minus risk-free as a linear function of the current price-dividend ratio. So if the price is high relative, we expect beta to be negative here if there's sort of this mean reversion. The price is high relative to dividends, then we expect the return to be low. If the price here is low relative to the dividends, then we expect the market to be coming back up. So we do expect beta to be negative, and if it works, this will give us some kind of forecast. So the data, if you ran this at a quarterly frequency, you get a kind of weakly significant, that's beta's estimate, that's the standard error on it from this regular regression. That's the R squared, about 0.02. For finance, that's not a bad, it's okay. It's actually, you don't usually see too many giant R squareds. When you run, basically if you regress returns, this is a theorem. Regress future returns on almost anything, you're never going to get a very high R squared. Because again, it goes back to a little bit of the efficient markets hypothesis.
Can I ask a quick question about the previous slide? That the volume figures are going up during the decline. And I'm thinking about currency forward markets where you actually get the opposite.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, where is that volume coming from? Is it these noise traders?
The volume, it's not clear which type. I think there are actually much of it. We'll come down to some other plots that'll show. This volume issue is very interesting. You brought up something I do think about a lot, because not necessarily, this is very strong in these markets. It's not necessarily, in differing markets there, I've always wanted to have sort of a really good taxonomy of kind of what we know about bubbles and crisis and excesses and lack of excesses in different markets, because you're exactly right. There are certain markets where this is exactly the reverse, right? The high volume is in the run-up, and the low volume is after that. And one of the things I think that drives it here is that much of the trading here, there's only really one asset. And also there's no leverage. Actually, one thing I didn't say to you guys, there's no leverage involved in this market. And they actually at the top sort of start to run out of resources in there because they have no leverage. The guys with the kind of really extreme beliefs are just sort of shut out of the market. I'll show you a picture of that. They can't really extend themselves anymore. So adding leverage to this might be an interesting thing. But I'm not 100% sure on this. I really wish I knew. Matter of fact, I might ask you more for different details on different, because there are markets where this is a very strong feature, but it may be reverse of some markets, absolutely. And and I have a list of kind of counterfactuals at the end, but that's an interesting counterfactual. So keep that in your brain. This one here, it's going to hit pretty well here. These are the predictions. Actually, these regressions work better at the annual horizon. That's the data. Here's the simulation down here. Now the simulation gets same negative coefficient, which is picking up the reversion. The only interesting thing is, and I said this is where the simulation sort of does the right thing, but is much cleaner or stronger. Note the R squareds are actually a lot higher. So if you do this at annual horizon, the R squared is actually 0.33, which is actually a little tough to believe. out there. It's actually in the simulation. One of the reasons it does pick it up is it's a little bit of an unfair comparison because this regression's using 100 years of data. This regression's using 1,900 years of data. So, it is a little unfair here. And you might be saying, this could be saying, look, if we had 1,900 years of data, this would be a much easier strategy to do. It is actually not clear these strategies work 100% all that well. And there is a lot of interesting debate in finance about whether these results really are real or not. You would see some pieces of it in these two papers, which are in the list of readings I gave you there. These are more modern finance papers which try to summarize. This is Cochrane's Journal of Finance presidential address. And they do talk about this. This is a really big puzzle that people in finance think about. This is another, this is real data, obviously, because it's so screwy looking. But this is price dividend ratios down here. This is the monthly price dividend ratios. And this is the monthly log of the variance in that month. And it looks like pretty much a blob, but there is a slight bit of negative correlation to this. And so it says that when the price dividend ratio is large, there's a little less volatility. When the price dividend ratio is small, there's a little bit higher volatility. In our data, in the simulation, this is very dramatic. And actually, if you plot this, I should have put this plot in. Simulation, this thing is very, very strong. Obviously, the real data, it's pretty weak. But we'll motivate this to run this regression. I'll regress the log of volatility on the current price dividend ratio and on actually a log of lagged volatility, because actually that's a very good, in the real data, that's a very good way to predict future volatility. If you look at this one alone, you do get a negative coefficient. It's significant, saying that when the price dividend ratio is high, price is high relative to fundamentals, volatility tends to be a little low. Oh, and I am doing one trick, so I'll be blatantly honest. Some of you might see this. I'm throwing out those crazy years of the late 1990s. They're just too nuts. Those dividend levels they're just never been seen before. Those price dividend ratios just don't fit anything else in the data. So I blatantly throw that out. This parameter becomes negative and insignificant if you add the late 1990s to it, because those data points just effectively take over this regression. R squared, not terribly big. You throw in lagged, obviously it gets that's also very significant and makes it, obviously explains a lot more of the volatility. Down in the simulation, this thing is just a lot stronger. You see a negative relationship, very strong in terms of it's fitting a lot of it, because that's very strong dynamic in there. The volatility tends to be high at the top, high at the bottom, low at the top, and somewhat. So again, the result is that you're getting kind of qualitatively the same thing, but much stronger in the simulation, giving the same pattern in the data. But this pattern tells us a lot about what's going on here. That we've got sort of this high-end volatility tends to be low at the top, high at the bottom. Markets crash into a very unstable kind of period, and they're rather quiet at the top. Because the actual data, I'm quite blatantly, let me be blatantly honest. So if I did this, if I throw that in, I mean, I think if I was more blatantly honest, I would actually put it up there. This will be insignificant. This parameter coefficient there goes to, I don't know what it is. It's negative, but insignificant. And it's basically being thrown off by these extreme data points for price dividend ratios. This stuff. Basically, these points take over the regression because they're so far from the mean. So we just cut the data basically right here. I cut the data there. The late 1990s were for price dividend. There are interesting explanations for this, actually. Some of them are more institutional, that firms are figuring out other ways to distribute earnings to their investors, usually through share repurchases. And so the real best way to do this is to try to find some adjusted data sets that try to account for that. But anyway, that's my very quick explanation, honest explanation for that number. So I think historically, over the whole period, this is not a reasonable pattern to these things. Okay, let's see what's going on in here. Now, because we have all these traders, we can see what they're doing. How do they respond to what's happening? These are their forecasts. These are the adaptive and the fundamental types forecasts of future returns as a kind of annualized percentage. And you can see the most dramatic ones are the fundamental guys. So when the price drops, they predict the return. So they predict a huge return there. So that's what they should be doing. price is really low relative to dividends, they predict it's going to come roaring back up. When the price is high, their forecasts are very low. So the red line is doing exactly what it should, very dramatically. The adaptive guys do what they should, actually, although less dramatically. The price is sort of slowly crawling up. Their forecasts are high. When the market comes tumbling down, their forecasts drop down. So they actually don't take as large a swing as the fundamental guys, but they're moving all in the right direction. So these are their expected return forecasts. How does that convert into portfolios? We can see exactly what they're doing out there. As the market moves from peaks to drop-offs here, the fundamental guys, so the market crashes here, it comes crashing down. The fundamental guys come shooting up. There they are. That's their fraction. This is their fraction that they want to put in the stock market. The trend-following guys guys are getting out of there. They've seen that sudden drop and they're out of there. Same pattern right here. You can see them. Of course, they're just mirroring each other, which is exactly what they should be. These are our two. As I said, that these guys are the core, kind of the core of the dynamics here. These are the very active strategies that are playing against each other. I want to emphasize one other interesting thing. What I'm tracking down here is risk. This is a measure of their estimated risk for differing types. Remember that there are differing gain levels for risk. They're sort of the low gain types. That's the blue line. Those are the long horizon guys who take a very long perspective towards risk. Then there are the red guys who take a short, those are high gain, they take a very short perspective. So the long horizon guys, their estimated variance, this is in an annualized level in terms of volatility, is basically flat. The short horizon guys respond to all of these various crisis periods. Boom, it goes shooting up, the market comes crashing down, they go shooting up. Market, it takes them a little while, but they actually, because they're actually gain, they still have the gain parameter, but they will adjust as those markets become unstable. They flip their estimates of risk around. And we're going to see something interesting related to that in just a little bit. This is sort of also the grand NT plot for this. These are the fractions of wealth of the different strategies out there. And this turns out to be very, very important. Now before you saw that in those other plots, it was flopping around a lot. There are fluctuations in this. Matter of fact, this is over the entire simulation run, which is 200,000 weeks, so it's a very long thing. There are some pretty interesting fluctuations in this, but they're not as unstable as they were before. We don't see people going from like 0 to 1, 0, back and forth. These are in fractions of wealth of the different strategies. We don't see those extreme fluctuations, but they're sort of there. What's interesting is the ordering. Let's go through from sort of lowest to highest, or maybe an important differing parts. Matter of fact, the two kind of casual strategies are interesting. This is the noise trader. I said that they drive themselves out of business. They basically predict all those correlations, they drive the correlations to 0, then they really can't make money off that strategy anymore because they've kind of driven all the autocorrelation in the series to near 0. They effectively put themselves out of business and they go to a very low fraction of wealth here. They're ready to come back at any time if something appears, but they really kind of, and that's like an efficient market story. That's part of it. That's, they predicted it, they drove the phenomenon away, and they put themselves out of business. But this model has many more things going on at different horizons. These are the fundamental types. And note that yes, that's really them, around 12%, 15%. They hang around, or roughly plus or minus 10% of the population. So they're the next level up. Here are actually buried on top of each other are the buy and hold types, who end up holding almost 40% of the wealth. And also so do the adaptive types. Now, the two, you may say though, so these passive guys are a big part of the market. And I think one of the things happening with that is the amount of predictability in this market is still not that great. Even when you think about some of these strategies, the predictability is not perfect out there. And so just doing nothing is not a bad strategy out there. It's not that worse. And so in markets that are reasonably efficient, passive strategy might be okay in this. But notice in magnitude, they're balanced by the adaptive types. And now we come back to this issue of the adaptive strategies or trend-following types are roughly, they're about 0.4. The guys who are going to stabilize stuff, they're about 0.1. And there comes kind of limits to arbitrage issue, is the amount of wealth in sort of stabilizing strategies is much less than the guys who are going to kind of come in and help when the market actually falls. And so that's sort of a fundamental issue here, is why did these guys end up with so little wealth out there? We'll keep trying to answer that, and that's really the sort of destabilizing aspect of this market. One other thing that goes on, so let's look at the fundamental strategies here and why they might not do so well. So these are the fundamental strategies. Again, these are just the fundamental types. But remember that even inside a strategy of a strategy, they have differing perspectives about risk. So in the world of fundamental strategies, there are some that take a long-range view of risk and some that take a short horizon view of risk. And they're both plotted here. These are their fractions. So look at the blue first. I'm just repeating what those volatility estimates or variance estimates, risk estimates look like down here. The low variance gain guys, that's the blue guys. They're taking the long-range perspective. They do exactly what they're supposed to be doing. The market crashes, there they are, boom. They go right up. Market comes down again. There they are pretty much consistently. They're right back there maxing out their portfolios. Remember, they can't borrow or anything, so they're stuck up here. Matter of fact, they can only, this has a maximum set to like 0.95, not 1. So they're maxing whatever they can do. The other guys who take the kind of shorter perspective on risk, they're fundamental types. But when the market crashes, their expected return component is saying buy, buy, buy. But their risk side is saying, I'm scared. And you can see them sort of backing off. They start initially getting kind of there, but then they sort of, oh my God, what's going on? And then again, they're just not that effective here doing what they're supposed to be doing. And why? It's because they're scared. In each case, they just don't have the guts to sort of I'm not saying this is like a character flaw in these guys. It's part of the model. And I don't think it's an unrealistic thing. It's just hard to sort of come in and buy in the middle of a falling market. And because they view risk as being high at that time. And I don't think this is kind of a crazy thing to be thinking about modeling here. And that's what's driving it. So these guys are not effectively, these strategies are not really doing the kind of effective fundamental trading that they should be. They're not taking as big enough a position as we'd like. And therefore, they're not doing as much work to stabilize these things. You can, sort of as a side, look at the distribution across these gains levels. If you look at, so this is for each strategy, adaptive, fundamental, and noise. How do they distribute across these different time perspectives? The adaptive guys, actually, these are the short horizon types. These are the low gain. These are the long horizon types. So they have a bunch of wealth over there still looking at fairly short range phenomena. And this is completely endogenous in this model. All these guys, all these things are sort of competing with each other. So these distributions are completely endogenous. The fundamental guys do have a lean towards using sort of slightly longer models, but they maintain kind of a distribution generally through here, allowing a lot of different gains. Consistently, the noise traders are interesting. As I said, they're the one strategy that really works and sort of does what you would expect. They use generally lots of long horizon data to estimate these autocorrelations and use them and seem to use them pretty effectively. If you flip this over, that's in the forecast side. If I flick to the variance side, this is much blurrier, actually. The variance side suggests that in terms of risk, all horizons kind of remain active. There's a little emphasis of maybe some short-term types in the fundamentals here. But there generally is a lot of wealth across all these different horizons in the variance side. So if we come back to thinking about what's driving these swings, we come back to the limits to arbitrage story. There's basically not enough wealth in these stabilizing strategies. And one of the things that happens is they also remember, I haven't shown you this, but these strategies drive on reporting their performance. So let's see a good picture here. These guys have to, all these strategies have to report their performance in risk-return way. The fundamental strategies will be taking a very large equity position during these periods in which volatility, conditional volatility is very high. So when they get reported in sort of these strategies appear to be very effective in terms of expected returns, but also very risky in terms of variance. And that also holds back agents from people from signing up. They're just not enthused about signing on, if they look through history of past, to these fundamental strategies because it looks like they bring them more risk out there. And I think that's kind of important. That's part of this risk-return question that goes on. You have to kind of convince people to take these strategies on. They're scared of these strategies. They're scared in the dynamics, and they're actually scared of the actual strategies out there. So that's, and some of the fundamental strategies themselves, they get scared because they have this very short-term perspective on risk. These guys, actually, I didn't show you this, but they actually get a little too aggressive in rising markets. Where is that? Let's see here. I think that's here. You can see them occasionally. Look at this. They're kind of, as the market's rising, they start increasing their holdings occasionally as the market is rising. And that's because they're reading off, their fundamental return model says the market's going to fall, but they're actually reading the risk side of that. They're reading the market's getting less risky. So they actually start getting, not only do they not buy enough when the market's dropping, but they're a little blurry on the upside. They should be much more aggressively holding back, and that's just as important, holding back to stop that bubble here, but they're not. Those red guys should be doing what the blue guys are doing, but they're not because they're reading this risk line down here too. I mean, risk and return come into play together. Okay, so basically risk perceptions are a big part of what's going on. This is actually, I think I'm going to skip this to move along. This is actually another sort of question. Sometimes this is actually the demand for shares, and I sometimes work out a very detailed explanation for what causes downside instability. I think I'm going to go past this and move on, but it's not critical to what I'm going to do. So I'll come back to that maybe if I have time. I want to kind of keep us on schedule here. Key thing here also is who's determining prices. And this is true. This is now back to more general agent-based stuff. And I think it's important to think about if you're building agent-based models, and people sometimes don't think about this. It's really, there's a marginal trader out there. There's sort of, who is the marginal trader? That's complicated. Who is actually sort of the determination of prices? Much more complicated than people generally like to think about in terms of heterogeneous, especially heterogeneous macro models. The prices are not really the average of all beliefs. I'll give you an example back in one of these pictures. What do I mean by that? So let's go back to this, I think. Here are the two different types. Well, actually here. Where's one where they're maxed out? So here are these guys. These guys are sort of maxed out up here. Now, if there's something that comes in the data that sort of increases their expected return forecast, it's going to have no impact on the price whatsoever because these guys have already maxed out their portfolio. So, if you were thinking of, the price, it's a function of the average expectation. Absolutely not true here because I can move these guys' expectations. If I move them lower, obviously it might affect, but if I move them higher, it's going to have no impact on the price because they've already maxed out their portfolios. This is a complicated problem. I think it's very relevant to real markets, is that some people are, the actual price determination, those agents are effectively what we call inframarginal in the world of economics. And it does negate this issue. You think of sort of the market as being the average of all beliefs. It may not be. Many people may not really be part of that. And that's complicated. And it actually can drive very, very dramatic swings in prices. There's also an issue that was related to my demands, which I didn't say. Some of the trading in this market is somewhat mechanical in that when the market falls, some of these traders need to rebalance, particularly the buy and hold types. And that actually is also important. They have really no fancy preferences going on. And that is also important in this. These are sort of more speculative things going on. I wanted to say a few things about things that this does. Before I wrap up and get back to more general things that it does that are kind of interesting, but not obvious immediately. These are these big facts that are also interesting here, but are not obvious that these things are going to appear. And they're related to momentum, risk, and return. And I just wanted to show, and brings in another testing methodology that you can use. I said that I generate tons and tons of data, and I can do that. One way to kind of validate it or test it is to run a very elaborate empirical test on the data that you get from your model. I'm going to do a non-parametric, basically what's known as a kernel regression and it's a very difficult sort of thing. You're really looking at a simple local average of stuff. That's all a kernel regression is. But it requires a lot of data to tell you sort of how local an average do you want? How local can you get? That's what's known as the bandwidth in the world of kernel density estimation. That's really hard to sort of determine given a kind of fixed data set. But if you have a ton of data, you can use what's known as cross-validation, which you keep choosing random sets of this data, and you use them to forecast out of sample. And if you have a ton of data, you can use this data to get a reasonable bandwidth for your kernel regression. And I'm going to do that on my simulated data. And then I'm going to use that bandwidth also on real data. So I don't estimate the bandwidth on the real data. I don't have enough of it. But I use where I've got a lot of data, I've sort of figured out the model or model specification, and then take that over to the real data. And we're going to look first here at momentum forecasts. Momentum in the world of finance is often used. It's very simple. We're going to look at lagged 6-month returns. We're going to view a strategy sort of waits for a month, and then it looks at sort of the next 6 months of returns. Sometimes this is referred to as a 6-1-6 strategy. Very easy. You'll see that the pictures are very simple on this. We'll also look at a risk-return relationship between returns and volatility. Here we go. This is the lagged 6-month return. This is the future 6-month return. And these curvy lines are the kernel density estimate of what is that conditional future 6-month return given the lagged 6-month return. The red line, let's start with that. That's the US data set. So you see a very strong positive relationship going through here. That is actual momentum that people think about out there. There is a kind of positive relationship between current returns and future 6-month returns in the actual data there. However, it does flip around and eventually reverses. If I get way far out on lagged returns, you see a kind of reversal going on here, which is an element of kind of extreme moves here. It means that if you see a really big drop, it's probably likely to reverse in a kind of mean reverting sort of way. And so these conditional returns actually come back positive eventually. Now it zeroes out around -2, and most people are concerned with this range in here. The simulated market generates a similar pattern that you see kind of a positive momentum on the upside and a kind of mean reversion side on the downside. If you want to kind of think of another picture that lines, if you're going like, where is this picture coming from? There's some complicated dynamics. Just think about that asymmetry that was going on that this thing generates, that you have these slow ups, fast downs. So on the up, you're seeing, that's where you see all the momentum on the upside because it's sort of markets slowly go up. Because they come down so fast, you don't see much momentum. It's so quick that it goes down, and you pretty much, if the market falls, the next 6 months is likely to rise. So you're seeing that kind of pattern in this picture here.
Comes back to the thing you mentioned before. I have had problems since I read the article. The 1900 years compared to the 50 or 60, 70 years you use. I mean, I'm not sure how I fully get how you use the 1900 year, but I mean, you can find, in my understanding of statistics, you can find a graph that fits, you know, if you're comparing 50 years with 1900 years and select the right, you know, you run it, why 1900? Why not 1700 or 500 or, you know? Well, isn't it crucial to have a similar time span?
No,
otherwise you are, you know, searching for something that fits your real
No,
data.
I want to have the model here in terms of this, what I'm trying to do is say, well, I'm going to run the model sort of as long as I can to get what I think is sort of the actual relationship that from the model out there. And this is pretty, because the data set's so long and the way I'm doing the statistics in it, this is quite real in the model. This effect is not any kind of statistical anomaly. Now this you have to be much more cautious about because I'm sort of taking the bandwidth I'm actually effectively, which is essentially saying I fit a sort of parametric specification to the data, and then I'm going to kind of lift it over, to the model, and then lift it over and fit it to the, not even fit it, but just sort of report it from the much less frequent, the much smaller sample of the data. So you can't take this maybe as, you can't really do a statistical test of are these curves really the same, because you probably have very large sort of standard errors on that red one up there. And so it sort of probably wouldn't reject that they're the same. On the other hand, probably it won't give you stupendous, notion that we know that they're the same. So it's a kind of odd statistical test. It's true. Very quickly, this is actually cross-sectionally. This is what they look like going. These are actually Dow firms, just to show you that if we looked in the cross-section of different stocks, there is a kind of similar pattern. This is the median looking at the cross-section here, and you see it's a positive effect, and then on the negative side actually drops. It's not much on the negative side of returns. That's what the distribution of these things in the cross section. These are the 25, 75 quantiles using a subset of the Dow. These are individual stocks on the Dow, the roughly 25, 27 that kind of persist through the data. Very quickly, this is a risk-return relationship on this thing. What I'm looking at here is this is the lagged variance in the model, and this is the future excess return. Now, in a kind of normal world, you would think there'd be a kind of a positive relationship. This is effectively lagged risk, future excess return. And people have looked for this for a long time, and they never really find anything that's very convincing out there in the data. Here's the data again. It's the same sort of kernel density estimation used on the same data sets. What you see in the data, and actually other people have found this too, if you look very carefully, there is actually an early period in when the variance comes up, when the expected return moves in the right direction, sort of there's a positive relationship. But if you get it to very high levels of volatility, then that future return actually is lower. What it's doing is when volatility is really high, you're probably in the middle. Markets don't crash all of a sudden on one day. You're probably still in the middle of the market coming down. And so you've still got some more periods to go of the market sort of falling out here. And there's a similar feature in the simulation. It's just sort of at a differing level of variance here. It seems to be a little higher in terms of variance. What I think is actually interesting here, I'll say a couple things about that, is both of these plots, when you think about them, they say you can't do this with kind of an individual set of beliefs. There's really a diffusion of information that's going on. Basically, information processing is now moving across the different gain levels. We're seeing sort of, like for example, on the risk side, you're seeing the perception of risk slowly moving through the population, that people don't perceive risk the same way, and it's going across those different gain levels, and that's causing that sort of interesting nonlinear feature. And much of it is all consistent with this asymmetric price dynamics, the slow rise and fast fall. I should probably wrap up in about, let me go 1 minute or so here, and I'll finish up. 2 seconds on consumption, and then I'll let you go. It's time for break soon. 2 seconds on consumption. I said it doesn't really work very well. Well, that's true. Here's consumption in this model. Let's just look at this line right here. Remember, it's a constant fraction of wealth. This is the US data, grows at roughly 3% real consumption, annualized, 1.7, very, very quiet. That's the model here, 1.7. Very quiet, that's the US data standard deviation. Here's the model, it's like 13%. What's happening, of course, is the model is absorbing all the variability of the market from those wealth levels as they fluctuate around, so does consumption. So nowhere near what the actual data looks like. You can smooth it out if you use sort of consumption based on sort of an average of past wealth, and that does get you a smoother consumption, but you do have to add extra machinery here. Okay. Maybe I'll wrap up very fast here on this. Just showing we've seen that these various features, the mechanisms appear, these interactions between adaptive and fundamental types. Wealth is adjusting here, moving around, adjusting to successful strategies. Leverage was not necessary, although might be necessary to get some other more realistic things. We saw survival of these different gain levels. These were small aggregate shocks going in. That's all that goes into this, and we sort of get big shifts in prices. See very small shifts across wealth, across strategies. This is an interesting thing to calibrate, and I think about it a lot. What is the magnitude of these flows between these different strategies? I've been trying to figure out how to get good data on this. This might be too small even. I think some of those other markets are too big. And are these strategies, they seem to be interpretable. I can put very definite names on them. There's also an issue of kind of fast versus slow learning, which I think I may not talk about because I want to finish up here. These are things that didn't work so well in this model. Are there too many people using passive strategies? There's roughly half there. I think in the real world that's not true. The rise of index funds has been something only happening very recently. That might require a behavioral sort of thing. Strong countercyclical volatility, that is also an issue. And volume, that's also a problem, I think. I should put volume in with that. Is that really correct? Magnitude of predictability much larger than the actual data. Consumption's obviously doing weird things. And if I let those interest rates move, what would happen? This is not a model of interest rates, but I have a feeling because consumption's moving around so much, you would often have very volatile real interest rates if you started to think about modeling those. So let me maybe skip some of these things. I kind of want to move on. Yeah, I think I'm close to the end. So I think I'll just wrap up here and let you go to break. And I'll come back and I'll finish up in like 15. So if you come back in like 10 minutes, I can do part 3 in like 15 minutes. So, or if you come back in 5 minutes, I can have 20 minutes. So, okay, let's go. And I don't know if the coffee's there or if they drank it already.
Yeah, the coffee is still there.
Where this entire area is going. So it's both a kind of summary of where we've been, but also a little bit about what are some of the technologies that are on the kind of on the horizon. So we'll be looking at sort of directions, what are some of the things that are, and certain applications. So if you're looking for interesting topics, this is also a place where I might show you. And I'll say a few other things about empirical validation, which is a huge area, and then I will come back to macroeconomics. But this is not as long a section as any of the others, so don't worry. And it should be a lot of fun. So let's see how it goes. As I said, we'll talk a little bit more about agent-based technology, empirical validation, which you probably should have asked that anyway, a couple related models, and macro. So here we go. Agent-based technology. I've shown you kind of these ideas of differing types of models out there that people look at, and that's the agent technology thing often sits as a huge issue. If you start this, you are going to be trying to answer these questions of, do you want really simple agents? And I haven't, if this was a semester course, I would have shown you some other examples. At the extreme in the world of agent building is something known as a ZI, or zero intelligence trader. And there actually have been places where people use them as a kind of benchmark. They take traders who are almost random in their behavior, or agents that are almost random, and throw them into various models. And you may say, that's crazy, but it's sort of to understand some of the things that are coming from the institutional restrictions that might be out there on the model. There are also and I'll tell you some examples today of some very empirically driven agent-based models where you don't really think about all this fancy learning. You just sort of fit them to the data and just use what's in the data. And I mentioned very quickly, sometimes what's going on in agent-based behavior is places where it doesn't matter what the model is. They're probably going to be, their behavior is going to be driven by something that's going on in the market. Occasionally in financial markets, if you may have margin calls or something, or you're trying to cover short positions, you may be forced to buy or sell stocks, regardless of what your fancy learning model says. And that might be the important thing that's driving the instability. So it doesn't matter what type of preferences you have. You have to sell because someone you've got a collateral restriction or something going on. That in what models you're thinking about, that may be the very important thing that's going on. Now, it is true that there are still people, and I'm one of them, who still try to work on these more sophisticated agents that are doing adaptive learning. You want to think about how much adaptive learning, because if you add more, you may get more realistic, but you get more complicated very fast. The question of dynamic optimization comes up all the time. Should these be myopic agents, or should they think more intertemporally? As I said, again, the same choices apply. It seems more realistic, but it's going to get more complicated and involve more assumptions. And I said before, should you bring on board some behavioral types of ideas? I think that's a good idea, but it will make things more complicated as you move forward. So these are all things to think about. Big things in the world of finance that are still, I'd say, future and current advances. Multiple asset markets, believe it or not, they're still we've looked at asset markets like one stock. That's kind of goofy. And I think it's got some real limitations to what's going on. But of course, adding more stocks involves adding much more complexity to the model. Now you think about just expected returns, you think about covariances, all sorts of things kind of come into play, and it gets fairly complicated. But it's an important way to go. There are some people modeling these out there. There are people trying to do this. So it is definitely an active area of research right now. Networks. I haven't said much about this, but there are people attempting to model networks. So think about sort of I've not talked about networks at all. These are kind of flat markets in terms of how matter of fact, they're not connected to each other at all. There are many more interesting things that might go on with the dynamics of networks. If people talk to each other along certain networks, or they trade with people only along certain networks, that can drive something in terms of stability and instability. This is kind of booming in that we're beginning to get more network information. We just didn't have this data before. But as we get more and more of it, we're able to do something with that. Finally, another hard problem is asynchronous actions. These markets have been very synchronous. They're sort of like there's the auctioneer, we make our beliefs, we trade, auctioneer clears the market, we make new beliefs, we trade. It'd be much more realistic if these were very asynchronous, that people were kind of behaving, firing off, they're kind of out there behaving, they act in various, the timing of their actions are completely asynchronous. You can do that computationally. Very few people do this in the agent-based world. As a matter of fact, I can only really think of one model I've seen that even tries to do this. It could be a very interesting thing because, of course, the real world is quite asynchronous. Now, we've seen models, the power of using analytics is also an interesting question. The analytic models, those early kind of very few type models you saw, I think they are important for estimation and understand if you actually want to estimate those models. I mentioned there are papers where you can estimate those. I'll mention them again because it's so important. They have some interesting ideas in terms of how they overlap with our computational methods. So the analytics, if you kind of can overlap with some of those analytic approaches, then you can really kind of get a better feel for what's going on in your computational models. They do have some drawbacks. I mean, they're great. They look more like our traditional models. They have some of these problems. As I said, the distributions matter. You know, once these sort of distributions matter in a rich way to the dynamics, it gets, as far as I can tell, almost impossible to do analytics. Because I don't know how you summarize, if the entire distribution or the shape of the distribution matters, I don't know how you really summarize it in a way that makes it sensible for analytics. I mentioned another problem, these inframarginal traders. I think that's going to be difficult for analytic models to handle. I don't know, but I think this idea of where is exactly the price coming from? And finally, another problem, if what you're really thinking about, this goes to something deep in complexity, what you're thinking about is sort of really emergent phenomenon, sort of phenomenon that come sort of almost from places you can't quite figure out where they are. Analytic models generally don't do that because they're kind of everything is sort of pre-wired into them. So there's a tension here between, there will always be, I think, in these modeling strategies between the analytic side and the computational side. I thought I'd put this up too. If you're thinking about modeling, this question always comes up, like, what software? So I'll give like one slide, and I won't say much, because my usual answer, people always ask, what software should I use? People use everything. And so the ... is probably the most important. There are languages like standard programming languages like C++, Python, MATLAB. I use MATLAB a lot just because I have a lot of statistical tools based in MATLAB. This language, NetLogo, is a very interesting free, of course Python's free, agent-based oriented language, which is actually quite impressive. I'll show you a screenshot of it in a sec. Its drawback is it gets difficult to do really big models. It's not really designed, as you get more complicated, this language gets a little unwieldy. There have been attempts to build the ultimate agent-based simulation platform. And actually Repast and Swarm has kind of gone into the background in these things. I don't even think they're really keeping it up. It was an older kind of thing. Repast is very active and is a kind of platform. It's in Java. It's kind of a Java-related platform that is designed to build agent models. And it is gaining some popularity out there. And I think it's something you might explore. It might help you in terms of having lots of tools built up initially. There are a couple other platforms out there, but nothing is really, if I told you there was the definitive agent-based software, I would tell you about it. But my kind of key advice is probably use what you're comfortable in, or maybe explore some of these guys, or for lightweight examples, NetLogo is interesting. I said the empirical validation is something that pops up all the time. So what do we do? What is the answer to this question? How do we really see these things are doing something that we want them to do? First, we have to realize that there are challenges to this. These aren't models, and so I have to explain to people who are going, why aren't you, estimating and fitting and testing and doing the things we traditionally like to do? Well, there are a lot of challenges. One, some of these models are really compute bound. Actually, they take a fairly long time to compute for one set of parameters. So even with a simulation-based estimation technique, you're not going to sort of keep redoing parameters and estimating. It would take way too long. So that's problem one. That's a real practical problem. deeper problem may be related to ergodicity. I didn't mention ergodicity, but that's basically sort of a path dependence kind of issue. You know, if these models sort of really depend critically on their starting values in some way, this may be problematic for estimation. We don't really think, and that actually makes the entire estimation testing thing much more difficult and somewhat problematic if those sort of starting values matter. And then finally, some of these models are just plain complex. They have a lot of parameters going on, lots of stuff to do. So that's a problem. There's just too complicated, very simply. Are there other things to bear, though? Is there anything to help on this? Well, one is to bring in experimental data, and that's been very active right now. Can we take experiments where we can find out more in detailed laboratory settings what's going on with some of the agents? Now, obviously, there's an entire realm of experimental economics, and I won't that's not to survey that. But Kars Hommes has been doing a lot experimenting with an attempt to reflect over on financial markets. He has a very nice survey paper on this right here, which sort of tells you what he's doing in terms of experiments. So that's one route to try to get them going. Another way is what I call micro-calibration, is where you have data on what the agents are doing. Maybe you're fortunate enough to know a little bit about what some of the individual agents are doing. You've got some rich micro data, and you're going to use that to sort of model your agents. Instead of kind of having more general learning models, you actually just fit the individuals to this data and use it effectively to do that. And what I've been looking at recently is this. What I showed you is what I call kind of model identification, estimation, comparison, where I was kind of identifying models or estimating models out on the very rich data that comes out of the simulation and sort of basically doing an identification kind of procedure out there where I've got a lot of data, and then kind of loosely carrying it over to the real data to see if it's at least consistent with the real data. And I've been doing a lot of this. So there are things you can do. I would say that, estimating usual econometrics may not be the exact right route to go because of all of these problems up here. So think creatively when you're thinking about empirical estimation. These are some nice examples. There are people estimating some, particularly these small type models. There are people who've gone out and estimated them to data. So this is actually the Lux-Marchesi model has been estimated. This is it's one of those few type models. This is Kars Hommes is in here. I mentioned this before. This is the model that I probably would have talked about if I had 30 minutes more, where they're fitting a tube-type model to long-range stock returns and mean reversion, dividend price ratios. Very nice sort of approach to that. This is a kind of similar model done to real estate markets. This is actually a similar model, again, sort of two-type, but done to foreign exchange markets. And this is one of the earlier papers trying to actually fit one of these. This is one of the Kerman models, which is a very simple model, but fit to some stock market data. So there are people trying to do kind of estimation, but you have to use the very simple models if you're going to do more traditional estimation. The validation side is actually slightly different. You can do some other things to try to see if it's working. Obviously, you want your computer to be working correctly, and you want sort of reliability in terms of computation. So obviously, testing, various ways you can test your computation. Related to that is a technique known as docking, which I think is really Rob Axtell, Axelrod, I think Josh Epstein were sort of the ones who coined this term. And they wanted people to take agent-based models and make sure they're robust across different software platforms. So they want, if it runs in NetLogo, it better run in MATLAB. Do the same. If something fundamental, the language should be irrelevant. That's true, and so that would be very useful. I mentioned the idea of benchmarks, places of the parameter set where you line up with something very well defined and analytic. For me, it was that case where I just used low gain or long horizon, long memory forecasts. That actually lines up where the model actually converges in that case, and that gives me some feeling of confidence that the thing sort of works in certain environments. I look at this multiple time horizons to look at things. I should be able to do stuff both at the weekly, monthly, quarterly horizon. Another interesting area for validation, which some people have done, mostly experimentalists, is interacting with people. So there are agent-based financial markets that people have run. I didn't put the references in, where they've actually had people in the lab who are people, humans and simulated traders, trading with each other. And it's interesting what you might do in terms of validation is if your computer is replicating humans pretty well, as I start adding more and more computer traders to those simulations, it shouldn't change the results much if they're kind of just as good as having a kind of person in the laboratory. And so that's another interesting way to do validation. Finally, and one I look at sometimes is doing visualizations. Are there kind of ways, some of these markets are so interesting in the way they operate that it takes a kind of elaborate visualization. I think I have one here. This is what a net logo kind of model looks. Net logo has very nice, I'm just going to show you because it's a kind of cool picture. It has very nice graphical display and sets up a very nice user interface. This is actually a market microstructure model that I wrote with Ruichi Yamamoto. This is actually the order book going on. But the user sits here and looks at this and can hit buttons and do stuff. And you watch the whole thing. This actually graph up here shows you the level of heterogeneity of the traders. If they were completely heterogeneous, they would be spread completely across this box. So you can watch all of that stuff go by in real time, which is kind of interesting. And sometimes it gives you a feel for what's going on in the model that just kind of looking at data coming out of it at the end doesn't do for you. John Holland, who's a big complex systems, sometimes referred to these as flight simulators, and he wanted sort of to think of pilots would sort of use these, not real pilots, but you have traders look at this and they say, yeah, that looks like a real market. That's sort of a useful thing. They're also very good learning tools for people. Lastly, is getting close to the end here, don't worry. Some other interesting models that are out there if you're thinking about stuff that you might take a look at. As I mentioned, market microstructure, another area which if I had 30 minutes I might talk a little more about. This is actually financial markets at very high frequency. There's some very interesting models. There's a ton of models out there. These are a couple of very interesting ones. This is one of the core ones out there by Chiarella. This is a neat one by a group that actually is using some of the techniques I've talked about. They are actually modeling networks of traders. They're looking at who trades with whom in the futures market. And they build actual networks. And then they actually simulate some of these networks as this is a kind of micro simulation. So they actually build these simulated networks of traders. They look at who trades with whom. And then they actually, the agent-based model for them doesn't really have any learning. They just simulate these networks and actually they monitor how the networks change over time as they go through time. That's a really interesting model. There are a couple models of real estate markets if you're interested in real estate crises. This is a fairly complicated one by Giannakopoulos and a big team that have been working on US markets. This is a simpler one. I like this one as another micro-simulated model. I'll mention it very fast. It's my favorite model of the crisis, the 2008 crisis in the US real estate market, and shows you how micro things can do. They look at a micro data set of refinancing in the US, people mortgage refinancing. And they look at the conditions under which people refinance, given interest rate environment and prices of houses. And they find that with the rising prices of houses and the falling rates of interest, that will cause, generally in empirical data, will get you a lot of refinance activity going on. And what you end up doing is, what happens is you drag that model through the 2000s, people then are very overextended, much more overextended than they should be on average in terms of leverage. In terms of the real estate market, they were at a much more unusual location than you would have think in just sort of average modeling. So it's modeling all of these distributions of where people, because they kind of are actively refinancing and sort of doing what's called cash out refinancing, you get kind of the model in the real estate market really loaded for a big crash. No fancy dynamics and learning going on, but just kind of agent-based simulation modeled to data. This is actually kind of unrelated, but I know you're macro guys, so there is a model on labor markets. These guys also use networks. They have network information on matching in labor markets. Actually, it turns out on the Finnish labor market, and use this matching model. They're basically, again, no fancy learning, but they're thinking instead of being able to match up with any firm out there in the economy, you only move along very precise network channels. And they simulate that and get dynamics that look very similar to usual labor market dynamics. Market microstructure, one last advertisement if you're thinking about interesting places. I do think it has some very interesting areas of why in finance it's an interesting place to look. You have very well-defined institutions. There I pretty much, the modern electronic trading systems, we kind of know how they function. They're easy to simulate. Important policy questions, certainly about stability, if you think about the flash crash and these sorts of things. Maybe stability on a very high frequency, but just as important. you also, and actually they also have a set of empirical puzzles that they don't quite understand. They have actually, if you look in signed order flows, where you take buy orders and sell orders, and you sign them positive for buy orders, negative for sell orders, you have a very strong persistence in that. They also see the persistence of volatility and roughly uncorrelated returns. Turns out that's relatively hard to get all of those features. As a macroeconomist, I sometimes, though, ponder this question. Does market microstructure matter at the macro horizon? I don't know. I leave that open on that. Okay, let's get to the end here. I'll move back, and as I said, I was almost embarrassed that I didn't talk about much macro, and you'll see probably why, because I think these problems are big, and I'm not going to give you definitive solutions to this. So what are, first, I've not given you kind of, what are the channels that might connect these markets to, we have all these fluctuations going on. There are probably kind of obvious modeling channels that would probably connect what I've shown you. If you've got asset prices moving around, you can build, of course, macro models that connect asset prices to investment levels. We have several different examples of that. You look at, actually I shouldn't put that, several different examples out there of different macro models where basically your investment may be based on the kind of collateral you can put up. The collateral is often based on the value of your assets, real estate assets, and that's all you need to get sort of fluctuating asset prices to give spillover in something really fluctuating in the investment side. So I don't think this mechanism is terribly complicated or hard or difficult. A problem we may have if you start doing this, I think, is that some of this volatility may be too big, that this channel may end up generating too much volatility. These models move around a lot, and they're kind of, they're usual, if you write sort of on the average of these things, they're often very volatile. And if you think about tacking on macro side, you may end up with too much volatility. That's at least my kind of casual worry about on this subject, if I think about tacking a macro model on. So I'd have to think, you have to think clearly about what are maybe the mechanisms that kind of damp down the volatility as you go from the financial side to the macro side. And lastly, a real weakness here, which could be leveled at also at DSGE models, dynamic general equivalent, we haven't had much to say about institutions. And yes, it's true. These are highly stylized models. They're very weak on commenting about, what does a bank look like? What does a bank do? That's been a critique that's been leveled at other models. It's relevant for these. And so agent-based models, I think, are eventually going to have to work much harder on getting into sort of the realism of modeling financial institutions. I think that's a big open question for them. Now, lastly, on policy, before I finish, are you going to use these immediately for policy too in the macro side? Where are they going to come into play? Well, they do have this problem of sort of, if they're kind of reducing them into a way that you get a kind of clear, crisp policy answer out of them. And they're sometimes not that, which of these can be easily reduced into saying, well, interest rates should go up, interest rates should go down. They're hard, because of their kind of complexity, they're sometimes hard to do that. But we're sort of working on that. And there's a big debate in the agent-based modeling world too, as I started with this slide on this, of these sort of small, simple, stylized models versus large models. There are people who think that we should build really a kind of big, large-scale agent-based model of the entire economy. And I think, it's an interesting conjecture, but you have to think carefully about it. This is an interesting, certainly I don't think that doing this should shut down this. These are, and how well will we, will these be the ultimate macro forecasting models? I'm not sure. I do think they have a lot of really great uses in terms of policy. I still argue, I tell people a lot that I'm thinking about market microstructure, where you have a rather contained system. It's pretty easy. That we could have really, agent-based models could really answer those questions very, very detailed way right now. They certainly have that capability now, although people aren't using them very effectively. Another use that's not a standard, so I don't think, even if you're not going to build the ultimate agent-based macro model, maybe you can use them to break standard models. In other words, you kind of are exploring sort of the activities of an economy in very extreme situations with the agent-based model. And even though maybe you're using a more mundane macro model to do general forecasting and policy making, the agent-based model may say, hey, in that situation, the answers your standard model are giving you are totally wrong, and you'll do the wrong thing. And so it helps you interpret. It doesn't sort of sit there as a central bank as its kind of main, interest rate advisory thing, but it says something is a little screwy in this situation, be careful. And that may be, I think, sometimes I wonder if that's kind of the big use for these things. As I'm not sure whether they're going to be kind of mainline macro forecasting models, but they're kind of a thing that, pokes you in the side of the head and says, well, be careful. And I also think they're great, or not great, but hopefully very useful to design institutions. All of these things are models where we can drop institutional systems into them. We can drop different institutional arrangements, how people trade, whether there's leverage or not. All of those things can be sort of dropped into them, and we can explore those. All of those things can be carefully explored in these situations, hopefully to develop those things that are relatively robust and relatively resilient. And sort of that's, instead of thinking about predicting crises, we hopefully already have the mechanisms in place that automatically help attenuate them and sort of slow them down. So anyway, that's where I'm now close to the end here, at the end. We've made it through all this stuff. You've stayed awake somewhat. Actually, I'm way later than I thought. But I can take a couple questions, or you can run off to lunch. I don't, whatever you would like. I know it's very late. I'm sorry. Oh, you're really worn out.
Maybe just one.
Yeah.
Maybe
no
just one.
Yeah.
One short
Well, I'm
question.
around for a lot here, but.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh yeah, you get the mic.
Okay, just one short question because there's parallel. There's this session going on, SFC models and ABM, and I would like to hear your opinion on is this a useful combination of model classes, and how how could this emerge in the future?
What are they merging with agent-based models? It's which types of models?
Together with stock flow consistent models.
Oh, the stock flow consistent models. That would be interesting. I think those are, an interesting part to put those in. That's another way, another level of restrictions to put in to these things. To, you kind of know those things have to hold. So I put that in with sort of my, put in as much micro stuff as you know about into these things. Where you can put certain restrictions in is going to channel these things into a more consistent and possibly much more powerful thing. So I think that's actually, any kind of restriction you can add that seems to make sense is a good idea here. Because whenever you start doing this, you will feel like there are just so many directions you can go in. So if you can put some reasonable restrictions on it, that would be sensible. Yeah.
So at the end of the lecture, can we say that these models can be used for, are they considered reliable for policy analysis or policy recommendation for policymakers, for example, due to their too many degrees of freedom?
So at the moment, so I'm being very cautious, obviously, in my slide there. I think we have the technology. So some people would argue we haven't been working hard enough in developing these models, and that's true. They've actually not been anyway part of the mainstream of anything. On the other hand, they do have a lot of degrees of freedom, there's no question. And I think, and the problem has been that understanding sort of the ones that I think are going to be, the level of complexity of the model necessary for policy analysis does require doing computational experiments, maybe in still very stripped down models. And we understand them less well in the realm of computation. We sort of don't understand them as well as we would like, I think, in a big enough space to make policy recommendations in a lot of places. As I said, the place I feel very strongly about is in high-frequency trading or thinking about market microstructure. There, I think we do know enough, and I think the behaviors that you're modeling are not that complicated. But for overall macro, I would like to obviously see more explorations of these things, but I think currently, if I said at time t right now, they're not quite there for policy analysis. Getting there, but maybe still not quite, because of, as you said, the degrees of freedom scare people. And you have to sort of go there, but we have to figure out ways to restrict those and understand what are the sort of general features. Are there kind of big, deep general features that will, regardless of the parameters, regardless of what will hold? So I'm cautious, but maybe sort of optimistic in the long run.
That is basically why I find these zero intelligence traders and so appealing, because you can check which result hold independent of the choice rule that you impose upon the individual units, and
Let me tell you. I know, like in 30 seconds, tell you the story. Not for you, you know the story, but the story on zero intelligence, guys, is they were originally sort of appeared by experimentalists who said, the result was that many experiments in economics, the markets were generally very efficient. You were getting, if you do experiments and you could find, this is actually just trading goods back and forth with certain valuations, the markets were like 95% efficient. And people thought, isn't that good? Humans are so clever when we put humans into markets. They're so good at it. They're so good. Now, these guys then started what they did. This was Goad and Sunder. They put these computer agents in with no intelligence whatsoever. And lo and behold, they get 95% efficiency too. So it was purely the trading institution that was driving the result, not necessarily some great intelligence of humans. And across the board, they've been a very good benchmark here. If you've got a well-defined institution out there that you're really interested in trying to understand, send in some of these zero intelligence, and then maybe you start adding it, working your way up from very low intelligence to maybe higher and higher. But because I will tell you from personal experience, when you work with the really fancy agents, they do get complicated fast. So ZI traders have been a very important part, I think, of our understanding. And one area, it is true, market microstructure is an area where ZI agents put into a standard limit order book can replicate, not all, matter of fact, volatility persistence is one of the things it doesn't replicate, but it replicates a bunch of features out there, not all of them. So much of what we see in the data is probably coming from the institutional arrangements out there. How useful they are on macro horizons at some places, I'm not sure yet, but they are interesting. Okay. All right, go out and build some models now, guys. Thanks.